Man, I should have
Is there
been.
really like a pod that doesn't like? I mean, other than Matt, Joe Magician, like
Oh yeah. LML doesn't like Stannis either.
yeah, like when LML went on Jeff and Emmett's pod, he was like, yeah, Stannis is a bit of a bitch. And I was like,
Yeah,
why did your
yeah.
parents die in front of him, you
Right.
asshole?
Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of Planetos Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the fans of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and HBO's A Game of Thrones. Spoiler warning, this show will cover all material, including the main series, Dunk and Egg, the novellas, The World of Ice and Fire, quotes, and interviews by George, and its commentaries and bonus material. I'm one of your hosts, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
And I'm your other host, Travis. You can find me at Sir_Travis on Twitter. We hope you enjoy today's show. So in an interview last year, George revealed that he originally planned to leave the dragons out of the story and instead give the Targaryens mental powers. Quote, I did consider in the very early stages not having the dragons in there. I wanted the Targaryen symbol to be the dragons, but I did play with the notion that maybe it was like a psionic power, that it was pyrokinesis, that they could conjure up flames with their minds. George credits his friend and fellow fantasy author Phyllis Eisenstein with pushing him to include the dragons and dedicates A Storm of Swords to her. My friend and fellow fantasy writer Phyllis Eisenstein actually was the one who convinced me to put the dragons in, and I dedicated the third book to her, and I think it was the right call. George also briefly makes this revelation in a 2014 interview with Conan O'Brien, where he describes that the dragons were simply going to be a symbol of heraldry on a banner instead of the beast we come to know and love in the show and in the books. O'Brien, I don't know if this is a myth or not, but that intentionally when you started writing the series, you did not want to include dragons. You had envisioned this realm, but you weren't necessarily a fan of dragons, or you thought dragons should be part of it. Is that true? George responded, well, I debated it. I mean, in the very early, and we're going all the way back to 1991 now, I had written the first few chapters, and it's for a fantasy. It's very realistic. It's very low magic. And I knew I had the Targaryens, and they had dragons on their banners. But the question was, should they have actual dragons, or should it be a heraldic symbol? And I was going back and forth about that until a friend of mine, a very talented fantasy writer herself, Phyllis Eisenstein, read some of the early chapters and said, this is a fantasy. You have to have real dragons in it. O'Brien went on to say he appreciates that there isn't a constant stream of fantasy and magic that makes the story unrealistic. And George agreed that magic should be handled carefully, that fantasy needs small doses to make it tasty, just like the right amount of salt in a stew. So in today's episode, we're going to explore how the absence of dragons would have affected the books, and how George's early concept of Targaryen superpowers, as we'll refer to them as, may have impacted, in a fairly negative way, the story and one of its central protagonists, Daenerys Targaryen. But first, we have a very special guest with us to discuss this topic. Please welcome Frank Bum to the show.
Hey,
Frank,
Travis.
did I pronounce your last name correct?
Yeah, it's bum. It's spelled B-U-M-B.
All
Last
right.
B's silent. And if you guys have an original joke on that, we'll be first.
It's like the Tyrion quote. he's like, oh, I hadn't heard,
Yeah,
for every whatever. I forget his.
I'm getting visions of like little Frank in kindergarten being like, "What do you got? Just come on, just get it out of the way."
I mean, that's basically what happened because I mean, by kindergarten they were all like taken out, and of course, once you learn curse words, then you get a new round like in middle school when kids
Yeah.
start to get comfortable
Well,
cursing.
hey, okay, well, I don't know. I feel like maybe the people who told jokes about your name were just a little more clever. So my last name's Gray, but so all the kids thought it was funny to call me Brett Gay, and it wasn't very original, and also
God,
very
kids are little sociopaths.
yeah, very
They are.
homophobic.
Like
They are.
every stand-up comedian these days, like Childish Gambino, John Mulaney, they all have skits where they talk about how children are little sociopaths, and it's true. Like
Yes.
Joffrey's conduct seems out of bounds in like A Song of Ice and Fire, but really in modern day, is he that weird?
No,
Because
no,
children
no.
are all sociopaths. That's all I'm saying.
No. Kids have. Speaking on Joffrey, I feel like I could have been a lot like him if I had a bunch of power. As
Yeah,
because no one's there to tell him no except for Tywin, but and Cersei, but no, kids, like especially like young teenagers have they know how to like hit your insecurities as an adult, like.
he's like John Mulaney, where he has that line. It's like, no, that's what I'm insensitive about.
Yes, I think that's where I heard it, and I was like, that is so accurate. Like, I've had it happen to me. Like,
Oh my.
What a great
Well,
clip.
Yeah. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. I know we've all been interacting with each other for a while now on Twitter, and it's really great to see you face to face, to have you join us. We know
Likewise.
you are a rabid fan of A Song of Ice and Fire. We'll get to Stannis Baratheon here in just a minute.
Yeah, that's the rabid part.
That's the rabbit part, exactly. So what we do on this show, and to be honest, we haven't had a guest on in a while, and so we're really happy to have someone with us tonight, and someone who is very active in the fandom.
we had to
One
get
of the
back.
thing
We had to get back to our roots.
we got to get back to our roots. So the way we started off this this podcast back in July, actually, we came at it from the premise that we want to capture some of the stories of how people got into the fandom, whether it's the show or the books, some of their some of the favorite moments in the books or the show that fans like. What you're writing, what you're working on, how you're interacting with the fandom. I mean, we call it your Song of Ice and Fire story. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got in the fandom. We may have some more questions, but take off, man.
Yeah. And first off, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to do this. It's a great thing you guys are doing, and I think the 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 depth and breadth of the fandom of A Song of Ice and Fire is pretty wide ranging. It's pretty impressive. And you just see it on Twitter and Tumblr and Reddit, and obviously I interact with it mostly through Twitter. But there's such a broad variety of experiences and people who come at it from angles, and I do appreciate that simply because it's broadened my own horizons and understandings of A Song of Ice and Fire, like the stuff that Lucifer means Lightbringer and what he's done with mythology. I have no conception of that stuff, but
Mhm.
and just reading the connections that he's made, and obviously I don't have a military background. I have an amateurish military background, and I'm interested in it, but I don't
Right.
have like Brendan Beefish's Jeff's experiences with that. So I love that aspect of the fandom because it helps broaden my own understanding.
Yeah, that's great.
Which means you get the best part is you read it and then you find those perspectives and then you go back and read it and then you find all that new stuff that your compatriots in the fandom have exposed you to, and that's one of the aspects that I love about. But in terms of where I began, it was about 2011. The series had just come out, and one of my college friends said, this seems right up your alley because you're super nerdy. And I was like, well, hurtful but accurate. And so I take a look at it, and I think it was about episode 5 is when is like it was literally the middle of the first season by the time I got around to realizing what it was because I didn't have HBO. But then I acquire it, and I binged it straight through episode 5, and I immediately, as soon as I finished watching all 5, like I literally watched all 5 of them back to back on a weekend. I immediately went out to a bookstore. I bought they had a little paperback book like collection with the first
Mm-hmm.
4 books, and I still have those paperbacks. And I read as much as I could. I think I got up to about in the books, in episode 5 where Catelyn sees Tyrion, and so before episode 6, that's where I got. And then I watched episode 6, and before episode 7, I had finished Game of Thrones. So in a very narrow time span, I went from having no idea this series even existed to just binging all of it in book form. And then by the time season 2 had arrived, I had read it and then reread it because it just blew me away and on so many levels. And that was before, and then I got immersed into the fandom and again gaining those perspectives that I had no idea about. And it was really, and it was Brendan B. Fish and the wars and politics of Song of Ice and Fire that I kind of read about. I like the only like understanding I had is like I knew R plus L equals J. Like I knew that. It was
So you got that on your first read?
No, I got that. I on my first read I was like, well, Ned's not John's father. Like that's just not a thing. And so, and it's like maybe Lyanna and Rhaegar is like I thought about it, but I didn't know it. And I read it the second time, and I was like, okay, well, this is just fact. And then so,
wow, I'm just not observant, like with like little context clues like that.
My background is as a reporter, and so I did pick up on so the Red Wedding, I was blown away by that. Like I picked up on the fact that Roose Bolton was fucking over Robb by sending his like troops to go to burn and pillage. And I figured, like, well, he's doing that to, make Robb look bad for a variety of reasons, maybe as his own power play. But I didn't really see the Red Wedding coming. Like when I read the Red Wedding, I was like in a fugue state. Like like when that axe takes Daisy Mormont in the stomach.
Oh yeah.
I black out. Like I seriously, the first time I read that, I got to the end of the chapter and I did not know what had happened. And so, and then I had to go back and reread the chapter. And by the end of it, I was just dead. And so that's kind of where I was with the Red Wedding. And then, but so going back into the fandom, so I find Wars and Politics, Song of Ice and Fire, and that really got me into the fandom. And then Forsaken dropped, and I was like a lot of the fandom, and I thought it was like Euron's just all bluster, nothing significant about that. And then the Forsaken drops, and I'm like, what in the hell acid trip did I just read? Because with Brendan and Bran and all that stuff, you're reading magical stuff. But the Forsaken is just a bad acid trip.
Yeah.
And so then I found, Emmett and poor Quentin and his like essays, like just screaming from the rooftops is like Euron is so much more than what you're saying. And so him being vindicated on that, I imagine, was just phenomenal for him. And so that kind of got me onto the Twitter scene. And that's kind of where I've, made an okay name for myself and just, like inserting myself in any conversation with what about Stannis? What that? And so I get sent to my room a lot.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah. It's like it's not even a main meta meme at this point,
right?
For the fandom, but it's like a third or fourth tier meme in the fandom, which I'm kind of. But so that's kind of how I got engaged in the fandom. I've met a lot of great people on Twitter. The worst thing is like Ice and Fire Con is like 50 minutes away from me, but I'm not going to be able to go to it for like a couple of years. So, but no, it's just I'm really like A Song of Ice and Fire is the kind of I guess medium that I've thrown myself into the most. Like I've had one analysis post where I kind of picked up on something where Brown Ben Plum, anytime he scratches his beard, he's doing something shady.
That's a great post.
Yeah, thank you. And so that was kind of like my first foray into it. I do have something on the back burner, which we'll talk about later.
Sure.
That I'm working on. Hopefully, I can get to when it's winter break. But Yeah, so that's kind of just my experience in the fandom. I'm trying to, become like contributing to the fandom, not just being a parasite. But so yeah, but that's kind of how I approached it, and it's been incredibly rewarding, and this is
And
just
that
a step up in this.
that brown Ben Plum essay, that's on Reddit, right? You posted that a
Yeah,
few weeks
that's
ago
Reddit.
on Reddit.
I
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a
hadn't
few
read
weeks
it,
on
so
Reddit by Sir Donald Peasebury, which is like kind of has been. There's a long and really weird backstory about it, but there's a Stannis fan account on Twitter, and so he determined that Jeff was Sir Richard Thorpe, Brennan Beefish was Sir Richard Thorpe, and that Emmett was Sir Justin Massey. And so we decided, like, well, Frank's, in that Stannis fandom, so who are we going to give him? And it was decided that I am going to be the man who, after the Battle of Blackwater, is yelling in Joffrey and Tywin's face that Stannis is going to come kill them all. And it works perfectly because that is a guy who doesn't read the room, doesn't get social cues, and ends up dying a grisly, horrible death
That
because he
Hey,
won't shut up about Stannis,
hey,
which is just
I'm
perfect.
I'm an antler
So
man.
yeah, exactly, an antler man or
That's
something
what
like
Yeah,
that.
I.
that
See,
guy.
the antler men were doing it for material gain,
Right.
whereas that guy who gets killed after the Blackwater, no, he's a true believer.
That guy's he's literally like
okay,
sent to
okay.
his room like in that moment.
Yeah, he's literally sent to his room. In this case, the room is dead. And so he's not named in the story. So
Right.
like we're gonna make up a name for it. So it was determined that's Sir Donald Peasebury, and so that is what I adopted as my like ASOIF Reddit account for like the essays that I'm gonna be doing. And so that was my first one that I caught on Twitter. And I do want to shout out the Song of Ice and Fire read through account, which
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that was where I caught it. Like I
Mhm.
caught the second instance of it, and I was like, well, wait, he did this before. And so now I went to the search of Ice and Fire and I put in some search terms. I was like, no, every time Brown Ben Plum scratches his beard, he does, he's going to do something shady. And so that was something I picked up on. And there was been a couple of essays, and one of them that I want to shout out here real quick was from Lady Guinevere. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
Yeah.
her essay
Lady
on
Guinevere.
yeah, exactly. Her essay
Radio
on
Westwood.
how Brown Ben Plum's going to actually steal a dragon.
Yep.
And so my bet is that if he does that, or if he's plotting to do that, like George is going to tip his hand and he's going to scratch his beard, because it's
Right.
just there's like 6 instances of it where he's doing something underhanded and shady, and he scratches his beard the entire time. And it's like, okay, that's too many times to be coincidence. And
Yeah.
George loves his little, nuggets, and there's thousands of them. And here we are, 7 years later, still finding new stuff. And I think that's just, a testament to the depth of his writing.
Right, because characters have ticks. Like we're going to talk about Stannis here in a minute. He grinds his teeth, he clenches his jaw, but no one has picked up on anything that alludes to. What you've picked up on is something that really shows the depth of how George creates this world in,
I think
his revelations and the way he uses those ticks to herald something happening or potentially happening at some point.
And somebody in the Reddit thread, and again, this just goes back to the quality of this fandom, is that somebody pointed out the show did this, and they had Bran, and this was something that I didn't even catch. This part I did catch. Catelyn says to Bran, when Bran promises not to climb anymore, Catelyn says, you know something? Every time you lie, you look at your feet. And that's obvious, and that's a tell. And then you cut, like, I don't know if it's the next scene, but in a couple scenes, you have Robert and Ned in the crypt, and Robert's talking about how he wants to kill all the Targaryens. And Ned looks down straight at his feet and says, the Targaryens are all gone.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And so Robert says, not all of them, and then we cut to Dany.
Right.
But Ned's lying because he's looking at his feet because he knows that Jon's a Targ.
Wow, so that's great.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Like, I thought my Brown Ben Plum thing was great, but then this person, like, and I want to find them because
give them a shout out.
Yeah, I just want to find them. And I'm in the Reddit thread right now. But I know for a fact. And I went back and watched that scene, and that's exactly what happens. He looks straight down while he says it because he's lying about Jon. And I don't know, And the show, for all that we talk about the show, and especially as all of us as loyal Stannis fans, we kind of don't like D&D and what they've done, but again, they have shown complexity in things and how they do that, and that could just be another example. And so
absolutely. And we don't need to go too far into this, but we had an episode a few months ago now, where we talked. It was actually with Pat, wasn't it, Brett? We talked about some of the differences between the show and the books. The show actually has some great scenes that I think in some ways are better than the books.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, we do not, on this podcast, we don't attack the show. I mean, we think both are.
If you want,
No, you can't do that. No, I mean, you do whatever you want to. But it just, we all have criticisms of everything. And they're valid. We don't dispute that some of the criticisms are valid. It's just, the show brought me to the book, so I will never, I'll never attack it just to attack it. Like, if I have a legitimate criticism, I'll level it. But that just really frustrates me to something that I love so much that also brought me to something I love even more.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. And that's kind of the way I approach it, is that like, if it weren't for the show, I am in the camp of people who, if it weren't for the show, I would never have known about these books. And I can't imagine, like, there would probably be a lot happier people on Twitter if that were the case. So.
Yeah. One thing I want to, before we move on, one thing that I picked up on that you were saying, not only do we bring our own abilities with you, if you will, like you said, with B-Fish's military background, with other folks, your background as a reporter where you pick up on things different. We also bring, what I love about this fandom is something that Aziz talks about on History of Westeros, how it's so necessary to go back and reread this, because it makes it so enjoyable. The way I approached it first, like, I was thinking this is purely just a fantasy story.
Yes.
And so my mind was kind of just, I enjoyed it. It was complex. It was one of the most complex things I'd seen, but I just kind of turned it off. And then when I realized this isn't that type of show, this isn't, not to attack Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't something I just sat there mindlessly for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, even though when Lord of the Rings came out on the cinemas, I kind of went on a deep dive in the fandom then, because I'd read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid and loved it and everything. But when I realized what this show was, that's when I went back and said, "Oh, this is something different. I need to figure out what's actually going on here." But you're right. I mean, you sometimes approach it a little differently, but then there's something that draws you in. It can be different things for different people, but that's also a thing that I love about the show, that we're all kind of brought to it in a different manner. Not only do we analyze it differently because of our backgrounds, but it captures us in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so interesting how, not just like how different different stories can bring in different people for different reasons, but you've got, and this was something that's been pointed out on Twitter. I think it was Emmett, poor Quentin, who pointed out that there, like, the breadth of like people who like Stannis, and obviously there's a ton of people who don't, but the people who like Stannis varies, like, politically. Varies from Jeff and myself, who are more of the conservative bent, all the way to like Emmett and Stephen Atwell, who are basically going to put Jeff and I up against a wall once the revolution comes. So, that is, and the thing is like, it's not just those people who like Stannis, for other reasons, but you have people of that varying of politics who like Stannis for his political reasons, and that's just one character, and he's not even a main character, as much as it pains me to say. That is a secondary character who inspires that kind of things. And like, again, you have characters like Aegon and other characters like Barristan who inspire that kind of depth and perspectives. And I've never encountered. I read Lord of the Rings when I was younger, and maybe I need to give it a reread and reread, like the Silmarillion and all that other stuff, because it's been so long, and I wasn't an adult when I read them. But it's so, and it's so incredibly complex for me. And
Hmm.
Song of Ice and Fire, just that's one of the reasons that I love it so much, and why I imagine so many people do.
Right. Well, as a pragmatic moderate, I'll advocate to our Lord for Quentin to spare you and Jeff.
Yeah, but advocating for someone who's been proscribed by the Revolutionary Council, I mean that's anti-revolutionary behavior too. You're gonna get shot too.
Well, that's what I was just gonna say. The moment I say, "Well, now wait, there's a compromise," I'll be shot immediately.
No, you're a dirty centrist, man. You're gonna get killed before I do.
Oh shit. So you've brought him up several times. So let's talk.
Who's that?
Wait, what?
Let's talk about Stannis. Now we want to say to the folks out there, we have something planned in the future. You've got something, like you said, on the back burner. I don't want to give anything away. Well, we've now have something planned from our discussion with you. We're hoping in the near future to have an episode focused on Stannis Baratheon. And like you said, there's so many people out there who love him. There's so many people out there who hate him. We want to
find a hater for that episode.
I just don't think I can do that. Like, I just
like to balance it out, because if it's the three of us talking about Stannis, then people are just gonna get bored.
This is not where I'm centrist.
I want to I want to see an angry Travis.
No. You don't want to see my Scots Irish blood boil and but let's talk just about him. I mean, is he your favorite character?
He is, like, well, first off, in my notes when I said, let's talk about Stannis, I put we don't have nearly enough time. And so he's not just my favorite Song of Ice and Fire character. He is my favorite fictional character of all time.
Wow.
There's not a close second. And the notion, like, there's 12-year-old me, waking up to watch, Batman animated series going, what the hell are you talking about?
Oh, nice. The early 90s.
Yeah, the early 90s,
great.
exactly. And so
that's great.
Yeah, and so my number 2 Song of Ice and Fire characters is either between Brienne or Dany herself, which obviously helped this episode. But the gulf between like Stannis and those two versus again, the gap between one and like the two duking it out for 2, and then obviously Davos is taking the 4th spot after those two. But again, it's just, again, it goes back to what I said. The depth of that character stands out even in one of the deepest series of all time. And and the thing about him is that I was a fan of him even before we see him on the page, which is something Martin does so well, in that he foreshadows characters.
Yes.
Even before you see them and get and learn more about them. Like, take for example Tywin. Obviously the biggest thing of foreshadowing for Stannis is Ned thinking, it was hard for Ned to think, what could have possibly frightened Stannis Baratheon, who held Storm's End through. No, I don't have this committed to memory. Why are you looking at me like that? But then he also thinks about Tywin Lannister. I would sooner trust a pit viper, a child to the care of a pit viper before Stannis Baratheon. And he does that really well. And he's still doing it.
Before Tywin.
Exactly, for Tywin. And so, like, and this is something Martin really does, that before you even see people on the page, he's giving you so much backstory, so that when you finally meet them, it's not like, oh, I don't know what the hell this person's about. Like, take Holland Reed, for example. Like, if we see him in Winds of Winter, we know a ton about him based on his kids, based on what Ned thinks, and that's something that he does. So again, I was a fan of Stannis even before we met him, and then we meet him, and it's just, and the thing that I love about him is, there's there's emo fans of Stannis who love him because he's just mopey and just looks out at his outside of his dragon demon fortress. There's military fans of Stannis, which is kind of where I came at it from the angle.
Yeah.
But the thing that I've ultimately loved about him is that he grapples with enormous philosophical questions that don't really have a good answer. And so, and that is most poignantly talked about in his "If I must sacrifice one child to the flames to save 1,000,000 from the dark." And it's like he is a walking trolley problem. and that's going to be fascinating to see how he deals with it. And the conversations now about, and a lot of the conversations about Stannis, when people are accurately hating on him, it's like, well, he was about to kill Edric. And then the question becomes like, okay, well, would you? And so,
Right.
and the conversations about that are fascinating about people, because you get to learn so much about people and how they view the world just based on that conversation. But that's not even my favorite conversation, philosophical point about Stannis. It's about the nature of faith and justice. And so Davos 1 of A Clash of Kings, and I actually got kind of some surprised looks at me, because that's my favorite chapter in the whole series. And so, but the line, and this is my favorite line in the whole series, is Stannis says that any god so monstrous as to drown my mother and father would never have my worship I vowed. And then a lot of people have taken that he's an atheist, and
Right.
that's you do have that strain with him, where he's just like the gods don't mean anything. But to me, what I've taken as him is that he's more of an agnostic, in that his point is that it's less about belief for him, and it's about justice. He's not saying there are no gods.
Right.
He's saying any gods. He's saying if they exist, they are not just. And for Stannis, in order to have Stannis' fealty, his worship, you have to be just.
Yeah.
So everyone, and again, it goes back to that line that he gives Davos, that everyone will reap what they have sown, from the highest lord to the lowest gutter rat. And for Stannis, that includes gods. So if you have gods who are going to drown his mother and father, they're not going to get his worship.
Yeah.
And to me, that is so powerful, his belief that injustice, that gods have to obey that law.
But,
and that's amazing.
Well, I think that's a great point, because and again, we don't want to give too much away about a future episode, but in doing some research on drafting a script, one of the quotes that I really picked up on is I had forgotten how after the Red Wedding, it may have been Selyse or someone is yelling, it was the divine hand of the Lord of Light, and Stannis says more like it's the
hand of Walder, spotted and palsy.
Spotted and palsy hand of Walder Frey. And I looked at that when I saw that line as further evidence of he's not really trusting in the Red God. But what you just said is, he's kind of like, why would a god kill someone at a wedding unjustly? Like, why would he use the phrase "who are traitors"?
Well, I mean, I think his skepticism is.
I think his skepticism is still there, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think, he throws Robb's. He throws Robb's.
He does it right,
and he contemplates it, and that's a good point that people bring in. Is that Stannis really do enough to get Robb's allegiance?
Right.
And he says some things in A Dance with Dragons where he kind of gives Robb short thrift and pretends that he crowns himself before he marches south, which is just not accurate. And I get that, but I mean, to me, it's just he is very, very uncomfortable with the religious aspects that have kind of been thrust upon him. Like he wanted to use Mel basically as an Apache helicopter in the middle of a feudal society and just drone strike people, from 100 miles out with a Hellfire missile, the equivalent of a Hellfire missile. And now he's getting all of this. Well, wait, there's more to it than this, and I'm not really sure how I think about that, given his prior relationships with gods, which was, you drowned my mother and father, so I'm not going to worship you.
Right.
And so, and so that's kind of where I approach Stannis, in that there's the philosophical questions. Just his own story is incredible. Storm's End, the siege, and things that happen off page, like his recruitment of the Northern Hill tribes, which is something that I really think was a mistake to leave off the page somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how, like what POV you would have gotten to see that, but not seeing it.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, that would have been.
Because,
and again,
I just couldn't imagine Stannis like sitting around campfire, getting drunk with the hill tribes, like eating their food, like chatting them up. It'd just be kind of weird.
Even as John says, you have to like compliment their daughters.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
And given his and I will say this, and I want to get this, Stannis' misogyny is a very legitimate reason to not like him. And so the notion that that's what he did to compliment
the
Hill tribes, daughters, in order to gain their loyalty is, I mean, did he do it?
It's
Or did he find some other way?
Right.
Is the northern hill tribes, is the northern culture of no BS, much more suited to Stannis as
I
other?
think, yeah, I think
that
that's a good point.
Yeah, and so maybe he did it that way, where he came to them and said, "Look, I'm not going to order you to follow me, but I'm out here to kill Boltons and Freys. Let's eat some food, and then let's get up and go do that."
Yeah.
Like, was that his recruitment drive, or did he do like kind of the thing that he's so uncomfortable doing and flattering and doing that, which John recommends? And so,
yeah.
either way he would have done it would have been incredible to watch.
Yeah.
So,
It is. That's the one thing that I think is out of character for him, because I didn't need his misogyny. That's because he says, and I think there's only like, isn't there like just one reference where he says something? I can't remember. Someone pointed it out, and they even said, I think it was Radio Westeros or
I mean, kind of.
but they were like,
It
that
is.
was kind of weird that.
I think it goes beyond just one instance. There is a pattern of it. It's said repeatedly that he's not comfortable sexually with Celise, and that he's
She's
very
got a
emotionally-
mustache. I mean,
That doesn't justify being awful to her. That doesn't.
okay, I don't think he's
Okay, so okay,
No,
that
I don't think
that
he's
might get
awful
into
to
sexual attraction, but that doesn't justify, like, stop clutching me, woman. Like, that's your wife. Like, so that's like, he's not comfortable around her. He doesn't. I mean,
don't know.
hang on. So the other instance is like, so just because you're not sexually attracted to your wife doesn't mean you get to treat her like garbage. And so with Celise, he's very uncomfortable with her and any woman sexually other than Mel. And again, that's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole
And
other
so, but he also tells, like he's a complete asshole to Gilly when Gilly has done nothing wrong and is the victim of enormous trauma. He basically makes light of the fact that her own father raped and impregnated her, and says, and yeah, it's a funny line on first read through. It was like, "This is not King's Landing." It's a great burn against the Lannisters. But then you go back and it's like, and he says, "I hired her for her teats, not her
Right.
spreading tails."
Yeah,
and it's
that's
like,
a-
well, no, you dragooned her. And so
Right,
that's
right.
one aspect. And then his comments to Asha about how, the gods didn't make you a man, so how can I? When she's offering to like help him. And so again, so it is, in my opinion, it is a pattern of misogyny from him, and it's just like, and I do think
to be fair, a
at
lot
least
of
it's
that
not-
comes in that comes in a lot of that comes in Dance with Dragons, right? Or no?
Yeah.
Or,
I mean the stuff with Asha and Gilly, yes, is Dance with Dragons, but the stuff with about Celise and other characters, making light of the fact that he's not comfortable with women as compared to Robert,
yeah,
is definitely pointed out before that.
Mhm.
And I do think I don't think it's out of character for him, because there's tons of men who are, they're competent in a lot of ways, like Stannis is described as strong, just, and able.
Right.
But there's tons of people like that who are not comfortable with the opposite sex, or and there's tons of women and men of all stripes who are, they're competent in so many ways, but when it comes to their attractions, they're not.
Yeah, I think I think you've pointed out some things I didn't consider.
Yeah, same.
And I mean, he's not Randall Tarley misogynistic. I mean, that guy.
And that's a low bar to clear. That's
Right.
very low.
Right.
Like, no, and he doesn't, and a point in his favor, given the culture that he is in, which is a brutally misogynistic culture,
Right.
is he gelds rapists. And,
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And so enforcing that kind of discipline amongst his army,
Yeah.
while still inspiring loyalty, among the common soldiers. So that's always point in his favor.
I've always just thought of Stannis as, and when you were talking about him being uncomfortable with women, I think he's just uncomfortable with most people. I think he's socially awkward. And that comes into it, but it does go. He has to have these counselors and stuff around him, but he just doesn't like them, and he doesn't want. He doesn't want to. Not only does he not want to listen to them, but it's almost just like it's grating on his soul that he has to sit there and go through these formalities of shit. And I've always seen the formality. He has a formal view of marriage. Like, I go to my bed to do my duty to try and impregnate my wife. Like, I don't disagree with you that he's misogynistic. I do, however, think a lot of it is this unbearable.
I think, and
way he
misogyny
interacts
is
with people.
misogyny is a problem no matter where it comes
Right.
from. But
Right.
for Stannis, I think you're right that it comes from a position of more awkwardness, and then that
Yeah.
awkwardness leads to some really bad outcomes in how
Right.
he treats Sillies
and when you double that with the cultural view of
Yeah,
women in
exactly.
this world, it's not a good recipe.
We're not.
Yeah, exactly. And so, go ahead, Brett. Sorry.
Oh no! I mean, we're not making excuses for him, but
No,
he
and-
but he
Right.
does seem kind of like he's almost like asexual, and just does things out of duty, and then he seems kind of like an introvert, I would say.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely an introvert, and that's kind of why like the emo strand of the fandom does like him. But that's we could talk about this all night. And
Oh,
we're-
yeah.
we're- and
Yeah,
so
and I think we're getting ready to. So
yeah, exactly. So let's we can save this kind of conversation for that. But again, like the fact that he does have those faults, like misogyny, like his grudge holding, like his kind of almost pettiness towards like Ned because he got named, Hand of the King. And I didn't, and so he has legitimate faults, and again, that's another reason that I enjoy him as much as I do. But
right, and I think I agree with you. Like to me, this is a fictional character; it's a fictional world. Like I like that Stannis is just kind of this relentless beast that is just he's going to march through no matter what. And yes, you're right. Like all of these, there are problems with him, but I can put my fantasy hat on here, as I said earlier, and I can just enjoy him throwing these zingers left and right, even when they're terrible. And I'm like, oh crap, but they're so funny. Just keep,
Yeah, it's kind of like that joke where you laugh and it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't laugh.
And you look around and you're like, oh, I wasn't laughing. All right, so that's great, and I this has really excited me for our Stannis episode, which hopefully we can get to in the next couple months. But I think it's gonna be a really good one because we want to approach it from a standpoint that others haven't. We don't want to. Well, anyways, we're not going to give away.
It's going to be a 10-hour episode.
It'll be a 10-hour episode. We can break that one up into like 5 parts.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks, Frank, again for that great Song of Ice and Fire story. Thanks for talking about the one true king. Let's maybe talk about the one true queen now. We, like we said, we're going to focus on some of George's early concept, but something in your story really struck me in the fact that you said that Dany is your third favorite character in a Song of Ice.
She might even be number 2. It's kind of like it's a war between her and Brienne for, and the jury's still out on that. But yeah, it helps that Brienne's chapters are not in the same book as Dany, so I can appreciate them both as kind of on their own.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
but
so go ahead.
No disrespect, but it's very fascinating to me because Dany gets a lot of. Sorry, did we say something? Right?
No. You're good. I got something to say after, but sorry.
Dany gets a lot of flack from both show fans and book fans, and so I'm really excited to have you. Brett and I are excited to have you on this episode to talk about her. But can you tell us a little bit why you find Daenerys so fascinating?
I mean,
I think I know after you just talked about Stannis and opened my eyes to something. I think you like her because she grapples with those hard philosophical questions as well.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and that is one of the reasons that I enjoy her story. And another thing is that both like Stannis, Brienne, Dany, and then my fourth favorite character is Davos. All 4 of them deal with being an outcast and not fitting within their particular. And really, all of George's characters have some aspect of this, whether it's Arya or Jon or something. He loves writing about outcasts, and really his only completely comfortable in my role in this society story is Catelyn. And Sansa starts out that way, and then she's in the horrible nest of vipers and predators in King's Landing, and so she's an outcast there. But George ultimately loves his outcasts, and so Dany, for that reason, is also in that, and how she navigates, going from exiled princess to Khaleesi to Breaker of Chains, to Mother and Misa and Dragon Tamer, and ultimately the very dark turn that I think a lot of us expect her to take in the Winds of Winter is going to be fascinating. But one of the reasons that I really, really do love her is that as a fan of the American Civil War and her role in just slapping around slaving societies is just one of the, like, she's basically General Sherman with dragons. And,
Oh, fuck yeah.
And every time I read her chapters, I'm just humming the battle cry of freedom. So, and so to get back to what Brett was saying with those philosophical issues, Marine has been accurately, in my opinion, described as a combination of post-war Iraq and the insurgency there, but also the Reconstruction South and how newly freed peoples are targeted for unspeakable violence by their former masters and how you deal with that. And Dany ultimately, kind of does what the United States did in that they left the slaving societies done. Thaddeus Stevens said we should have hung every single slaver and taken every inch of their land. And, I think ultimately Lincoln was going to chart a different course, but once we lost his political abilities,
Right.
Which path do you take? And ultimately we took, in my opinion, the wrong one, in that Reconstruction was kind of cut off and federal troops were pulled out while African Americans were still being lynched. So,
Right.
so being a student of the American Civil War and then seeing that kind of transposed into A Dance with Dragons is very fascinating to me. And ultimately, Dany's storyline is just cool. She has so many great moments. I mean, Dracarys against the slavers in Astapor is one of the like top 5 moments both in the show and in the
I agree with you.
books.
Yep.
Like obviously the number one moment in the books is Stannis at the wall where all the soldiers are chanting Stannis. Obviously that's number one. Let's not kid ourselves. But and the fact that D&D cut them chanting out Stannis in the show, it's just like, again, to get back to Stannis for just one quick second, that is just
God.
It's just another example of the show doing something they didn't have to do in order to make him look bad. They take away the loyalty of his shoulders, but you guys can cut this later. It's fine.
No.
I
agree.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, but so anyway, with
I
Dany,
I like
Go ahead.
I mean, I totally agree that moment at the wall is amazing. It's one of the best moments. But I also like Deepwood Mott. I love. I mean, he's not obviously right in there, but that last image of Asha
the banners
passing out and passing out and seeing a, what is it? She sees a golden stag on
the golden
fire.
banners, and then she sees the original Baratheon banner, and then she also sees Stannis' personal sigil with the
so it means he's coming her way.
Yeah, exactly.
But like I just that would have been a amazing battle in the show.
Yeah.
But anyway,
yeah.
And so and obviously dragons are just phenomenal, and her interactions with them, and also how she navigates power, and she even more that, like, George's point about what's Aragorn's tax policy, and that's kind of been memed, but that's shorthand for a really important point that George wants to make in about, like, ruling is really, really hard, and he makes that with John, but John's dealing it with basically a very, very small army, whereas Dany's doing it with an entire society.
Yeah.
And a society that she has completely upended. And she's doing the best she can, and she obviously doesn't do a great job. And one of the things that always irked me about people who kind of crap on Dany in Slaver's Bay is, like, she doesn't make utopia out of some of the worst societies on earth, and she's just like a teenager.
Right.
And the United States, who was full of adults, we didn't do a bang up job of that over decades. And the fact that she's doing as well as she's doing, to the point where, and this is going to be my favorite moment, and this is kind of a spoiler for the Tyrion 1 and 2 chapters, is that the freedmen companies that get raised by Dany and are trained by the Unsullied, they beat the crap out of a sellsword company. They beat the crap out of professional soldiers. And that's an example that I love, and it kind of also harkens back to the American Civil War analogy, where you have African American companies smacking around Confederate soldiers. And so that's another parallel that I like about her, but it also goes back to, I just don't like some of the criticisms of Dany are just based in misogyny, and also just criticisms that don't take into account that she's a teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but no, I really like Dany, and I'm excited to talk about, how things would have been different if she did have these kind of like superpowers.
Yeah, so let's journey across the Narrow Sea. Let's talk about the Targaryens. Let's talk about Daenerys. Let's talk about George's early concepts. So when we first meet the Targaryens in A Game of Thrones, they are broken and beaten. The last scions of their house, Viserys and Daenerys, are living in Pentos. They're guests of Magister Illyrio Mopatis. And the majority of their lives, they've been on the run from Robert Baratheon and his assassins, as they remember it. They've literally lived like dogs in the streets. They've begged for assistance from wealthy merchants and foreign lords. And they've only gained any type of power and comfort by selling themselves and their belongings. They are a pale shadow from the height of the blood of the dragon of old Valyria that once ruled, like the Roman Empire, over much of the known world. After the Doom, the Targaryens made a plan to conquer their new homeland of Westeros. They were outnumbered, but they had the will of conquerors and a powerful, majestic weapon on their side. Dragons, one of the ultimate magical powers in this story. And not just any dragons, but three of the most terrifying in history at that time: Balerion, the Black Dread, Vagar, and Meraxes. And of course, Aegon and Visenya and Rhaenys became feared and respected. Now, go back to the beginning of this episode. Remember that George's early concept was telekinetic powers, pyrokinesis, pyrokinetic powers. Imagine if Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya were literally shooting fire and flame from their minds as they conquered Westeros. That would surely not endear them to the lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms, and they had a tough time as it is on the backs of dragons. They were already looked down upon as strangers in a strange land, with their silver hair, their purple eyes, their pale skin, the beasts they rode, the polygamy, their foreign customs. So let's talk about why George may have left dragons off the page and instead was starting very early with these superpowers, as we call them. So we've narrowed it down to a few possibilities, and we're going to discuss these a little bit at length, but I'm going to run through them, and then we're going to open it up here, guys. So first, we know George is a huge fan of superheroes and comic books. I think that was one of the first bits of literature, bits of fiction that he picked up, and that's kind of indicative of the time period that he grew up in the late 40s and 50s. Comic books really took off in that time period. So this superpower kind of seems like something out of like the X-Men or Marvel comics. Number two, we know that George, both in A Song of Ice and Fire and in this early concept, wanted Daenerys to be a frightened character alone in the world. We'll talk more about this when we discuss later the original pitch letter. Number three, George wanted the dragons to be a symbol not only of the past, but also of House Targaryen's present state of power when this story begins, dead and defeated. Number four, George believes that magic should be tempered, used strategically, both by the author and by the characters. The dragons are fire made flesh, as Quaithe says. Fire is power and also magic. And then number five, George thinks that by explaining too much about fantasy elements like magic and having them ever present in the narrative really removes the spirit of mystery. And the dragons, we know, are the epitome of high magic in A Song of Ice and Fire. Why do we think that George, we've given 5 reasons, but are there other reasons you all think George decided to leave this off the page?
For me, and one of the things that I kind of want to talk about, later on when we look at like differences and what this would have meant for the story, to me, it kind of centers the power too much within the individual Targaryens and Valyrians, where a dragon can be killed and then you still have people, and when the dragons die, you still have these regimes because so you can have this downfall because if the Targs are actually pyrokinetic and telekinetic, how on earth does Robert's Rebellion even work? You would have to literally all of them would have to be dead or infants in order for this to work. So like if Rhaella, I'm not pronouncing that, but Dany's mom, if she's still alive and she can snap, Robert's neck or whoever's neck or light everyone around her on fire when they come to King's Landing, then there's no way for there to be a downfall but still exiles.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go with the exile queen story that George clearly wanted for Dany, even from the pitch letter, then you have to be able to separate out their enormous power gap between them and the rest of the lords somehow. And dragons let you do that. And so I don't know if that was a factor in George's thought process in rejecting these superpowers, because it's clear from like the pitch letter and everything else that he separates out these powers early on and decides to go with dragons. And I don't know if that was a factor, and we don't really know, kind of what led him astray. But I think that's an important part, because if he's going with the exile route, man, I don't know how, like Viserys is a teenager at this point, or is, a 10-year-old, or which is about the time that, powers kind of, maybe he could have finagled it and written that the powers don't manifest until he's 18. But then as soon as, Viserys gets that level of power, he's just going to come back right over the sea. Because this goes back to a point that Martin's made in the past, that how on earth do you have fantasy where wizards and lords still exist? And his point is that, not that they're, incompatible or you wouldn't have power, but the wizards would be the lords. Like if you have people who can shoot flames out of their hands, no one is ever going to join up in an army. Like you'll get guerrillas and things like and hit and runs and stuff, but you will never have a massed. It's kind of like the invention of the machine gun. You will never have massed amounts of people signing up to be in a feudal army if there's people who can literally throw flames from their hands. So the dragons are a way for George to have it both ways, in having those armies and this feudal structure, but not have a problem in that being ridiculous, because he had a problem with that in other because George is ultimately critiquing a lot of fantasy, and one of his critiques is like, how do you have high, very powerful magicians who don't rule everything?
It seems kind of, I get your point and I agree with it, but at the same time, it seems kind of like, if she just had the what was it?
Pyrokinetic.
Yeah, pyrokinetic. Oh, I think I saw one article where he thought about it being telekinetic,
right,
and not just pyrokinesis.
But
I kind of threw all those together. Just
exactly. Yeah. Mind powers of some kind.
Mind powers of some.
But it seems like I just don't see her taking on like a whole 10,000 man army or something, whereas on a dragon she could do it. So essentially she seems like she's potentially way more powerful, but yeah, you can kill the dragon and then after that she's got nothing.
It does kind of depend on what level of power are we giving her? Is she Professor X or the Phoenix?
Yeah.
Or is she, Jubilee, where she can make fireworks? Cool. Great. Fireworks. Awesome.
But I do understand too, like they cannot be down and out if they're all
exactly. And maybe you could do it like the X-Men, where it's like only some members of this dynasty get those powers, but then if you want to give those powers to Dany and Viserys and all that stuff, then how do you kind of work that out?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, and there's an interesting discussion among the fandom right now questioning whether it really is the bloodline that actually lets you control the dragons. There was about the Dance with Dragons, about how there's this character Nettles who she might just be a rando who figured out that if you like incubate the dragon with like, I'm giving you food and I'm backing off, I'm giving you food but I'm getting a little bit closer, like how you train any animal with food and familiarity. So it's and so the Valyrians might have done it with just like sorcery, and not bloodlines, but the Targs don't know that. So it's
Yeah.
an open question, and it's one of those questions where George is probably never going to give us a straight answer. But again, it goes to how he would circumvent that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no! I was interrupting you. But no, I do have a lot of questions about Nettles because the Targs were they practiced the with the rite of the first night on Dragonstone even after I think even after Queen Alysanne outlawed it. Wasn't it? It was Queen Alysanne, right?
Yeah,
I think she outlawed it
But
for
they
the rest of the
still
realm.
yeah, so they still practice it on Dragonstone. So a lot of those random people in Nettles was just a random person. She could have potentially had Valyrian blood, but I'm in that camp where I don't think you necessarily need it.
Yeah,
but
I like the democratization of that ability.
It would be very, and George's, and this is kind of a conversation that's come up with the fandom, and that George is not perfect, and this is one of the issues that we're going to get into when we talk about, comparisons of the story. That I've got a point I want to make on that, but just that George, it would be very problematic if we're getting into this eugenics, where in order to be a super special dragon rider, you need this kind of bloodline stuff,
right?
And given the overall, like, kind of, how do I put this? Very Aryan.
Yes, Valyrian.
Valyrian, Aryan,
Yep.
and then
Aryan,
the appearance of the, if you're going to get into that kind of eugenics angle with the dragon riding ability, that's kind of disconcerting too.
Yeah.
So, I do think George is like going to make a point that like maybe blood helps, but it's not everything.
Right.
So, but that's just something to consider, and maybe that's why he wanted it to be outside of, like, with dragons compared to powers, because the powers would absolutely have to be genetic based,
right?
Like not like DNA.
That's a good point. That's a great point.
Points, but also, if he wants other people to be able to ride dragons, getting away from like kind of having the power internalized, is that, and also another point, and to go with this in terms of heritage. And so the whole point of the series is R plus L equals J, and that's not the whole point, but like that's the big twist of that.
Right.
If Jon has these powers, how do you keep them hidden until he meets Dany?
That's a good point.
So if he's like setting things off with his mind accidentally, everybody in the realm's gonna run to Robert and go like, "Look, we've got this guy who's got these powers." How do you explain that? Whereas Jon's latent, dragon riding ability and affinity for dragons, if it is, genetics based or blood enhanced, that doesn't show up until he meets a dragon, and that won't happen until he meets Dany, and then the big reveal comes.
Right.
And so
I know this is a little off topic, but it does have something to do with the superpowers. I don't think it necessarily fits into the direwolf thing we're going to talk about later. But
yeah.
But everyone talks about Bran, or there's a lot of people that talk about Bran warging into a dragon, but Jon being a warg himself and having the Targaryen blood, do you think maybe that helps him tame a dragon? Like he's able to connect it and then be able to ride one eventually? The warging aspect or the skin changing aspect he has, because because no one talks about that.
That's a great point. For me, the question is like, we know warging is like, it's not limited. Like in Bran's case, he can warg damn near everything he wants, and maybe that's just because of his unique powers. But warging also seems to be a function of relationships, in that Robb, for example, is not warging Nymeria. He's warging Grey Wind. And that's, part of it is he's a warg and a Stark. Part of it is the relationship he has with Grey Wind. And so maybe it's a function of that where, Jon will be able to warg into, and maybe, and for example, Robb doesn't really warg into Grey Wind. Like he just has an affinity with him, where Grey Wind like channels his mood, where he really obeys his commands, and that seems to be the extent to what Dany has with her dragons, where they sense her mood, they listen to her commands somewhat, although not completely. So I think that will be the kind of relationship that you will have with Jon, in that once he does get the dragon, he will probably, if he gets the dragon, because we don't know, but I think it's very likely that he does.
I like that. I like that a lot. Like
Yeah,
him,
so
his
I think it's a
warging
function of
abilities help
relationships.
him.
Yeah, exactly. But
But
I don't think that's going to be the like where he's going to experience like dragon dreams the way he does with ghost dreams.
Right.
And I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Dany really has dreams where she's the dragon.
No,
she has some creepy ass dreams with like, Dream Euron coming to rape her, and Quaithe dreams and everything else, but she doesn't really have like, so we don't really know if she's warging hardcore into like her dragons. I don't think she is. I think she's just got that.
Well,
that
yeah, if she has any type of dream, it occurs in the first book, but it's more like the dragon eggs are calling to her.
Yeah, and that's subconscious.
Yeah, and coming in, or they're coming into her dreams. But after that, like you said, there's no Arya.
I think that dream might be even more like, it might not even be a link between her and the eggs, because how, like, the eggs don't have thoughts until they're like they're stone. Until they're like made, or maybe they do, but that's more to me. I always read that sequence that you're talking about as kind of like a prophecy that her dream seeing, which she does have, because she does have prophetic dreams from what I've seen.
Yes,
I think so. And so she, like, to me, that's her dreaming about the eggs, and those eggs ultimately coming to her and aiding her. I don't think that's a link thing. But I could be wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it could be a combination of both, or it could be, like you said. I probably think you're more correct that it's prophetic. But I also think in this world, prophecy sometimes is imbued to characters who have those abilities.
Yes.
So it can be a combination of those, but I think I lean more towards you. So let's just back up here just a minute, because I think the discussion that you and Brett had really, I think, resonates with the reason that there was a fall of House Targaryen, and whether they had telekinetic powers when they came to Westeros, or they had the dragons. What happens when they come to Westeros? They adapt to the government structure, the customs, the societal structure that exists in Westeros, and it's very telling in the Dance of the Dragons. It's very telling in, we're going to probably see a lot of it in Fire and Blood here in a few weeks, that they literally chain up their dragons. They still use them, yes. A lot of it is family feuds, where they kill each other.
I love that show.
They just kind of put their power to the side and adapt to this new kingdom that they're forging, and that really leads to their fall. And I think George especially is going to play with that when Dany gets to Westeros. How does she come? She's going to come at the front of a horde of foreigners, but she's going to be very cautious about, of course, we're going to talk at the end the fate of Daenerys Targaryen, but I just can't see her, especially the arc she's probably going to have in Winds. She's not going to come and just say, all right, yeah, I'll chain these guys up, because that worked out so well for me in Marine.
Yeah. I think she's definitely, we are going to see we might get to like a moral event horizon with Dany during her conquest. Kind of like with a lot of characters that we've gotten to. And so when she comes to, and it's being set up, and George might go in a different direction, but I think the setup is definitely there for when she comes to Westeros, finds out about the portrayal, the quote unquote portrayal of Dorne, about fake Aegon with Tyrion whispering in her ear.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna get really dark, and so, and again, it's kind of a function of her having more control over the dragons, especially Drogon, to the point where she, and especially if, as some of the, like the article that I mentioned by Lady Guinevere, if she has a dragon taken from her before she comes, then that's the Dance of the Dragons, where it's not just her going after Aegon, it's her going after Aegon with Brown Ben Pellam and that dragon. She's going to be so, because it's her children. Right. Like, she lays the House of the Undying to waste.
Right.
Because
That's a great point, because Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya, we don't think so. I mean, we might find out in Fire and Blood, but they didn't view those dragons as their children. You're right. I mean, she's got the mother instinct, she's got the conqueror instincts, she's got the
she also
savior instincts. Like, she's got a deadly concoction when she gets to Westeros that could blow up.
I mean, I'm on the bandwagon of, I think maybe Vic's gonna blow or get somebody to blow that horn. Maybe he might blow it the third time and kill himself by accident, and then thinking, he had the two people before him blow it, and that dragon's gonna fly to Euron, and then Euron's gonna blow the horn of Jormund or whatever. He's gonna get the horn of Jormund from Sam, blow it on top of the high tower. Something's gonna happen, and then somehow he's going to become the new Night's King, and that's what he's aspiring to be. That's kind of the bandwagon I'm on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like
Brown Ben Plum could have something to do with that, though.
Yeah, no, it could be that Dany loses both of her dragons, and that just pushes her even over the edge. She loses, probably Viserion to the horn, to Dragonbinder, and then that flies off to Euron, and then Euron does unspeakable, awful things with him.
Yeah,
and then I think it was Rhaegal or somebody who had an affinity for Brown Ben Plum, and then maybe he takes him, and then so Dany's left with just Drogon.
Maybe Jon has something to do with maybe helping her get Rhaegal.
Yeah, and that might be a way for
that's
her.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
That might be a way for her to see, oh God, Jon's the real deal, as Rhaegar's son, because my dragons are all about him. And maybe that's how Bran gets in her good graces, when he wargs into the dragon that Euron's, and maybe that's the battle on the astral plane that happens between Bran and Euron, is in the mind of one of those dragons.
Yeah.
And then Bran wins and then takes that dragon to Tyrion, and that's how Tyrion rides that dragon.
Ooh, I like this.
God damn.
That sounds cool.
And so, but again, I'm just speculating. But I think Dany. I think it's inarguable that somehow, some way, Dany is going to lose one of those dragons,
right?
And that is going to put her on a very dark path of, you have fucked with my children, and the mother instinct is going to feed into her dragon instinct, because all of A Dance with Dragons is a conflict between her mother instinct and her dragon instinct, as represented by Hisdar and Dario, respectively.
Yeah.
And so with that, if it turns out that one of them is feeding into the other, where her maternal instinct is feeding into her, if she comes back and all of her, the shave pate has killed all of her child hostages, then her mother instinct's going to feed, or the sons of the Harpy have killed all of her children hostages. Well, then her mother instinct's going to feed into her dragon instinct, and now you've got a feedback loop that's just going to make things really, and maybe not unjustifiably, but it's going to make things really dark. So, and you see that with what she does in Meereen, where she pins the 163 maesters to the ground. She didn't do that just on her dragon instinct alone. She did it on her maternal instinct of what those slavers had done to those 163 kids on the mile markers.
That's awesome.
So I think that's foreshadowing from George that she has this mother instinct, but that mother instinct can lead her to really, really dark situations.
Yeah. So we've talked about the fact that it seems like, obviously it's 300 years, but almost from the moment that the Targaryens take the throne and unite the Seven Kingdoms, they really begin their fall, their descent of both their house and their power. Just some of the things that occur during the Targaryen dynasty. Dorne repeatedly repels their invasions until they come into the fold. Their heirs, the Targaryen heirs, fight amongst each other for the throne. Madness takes hold of so many of the dragon lords. Dragons are dancing in the skies, fighting each other. Black fires rise up in rebellion. Wildfire consumes the dragons and their enemies and leads to their downfall. The dragons die out, and obviously some of the theories that the maesters and the other noble houses finally have had enough, and they have their own ambitions and schemes to see them removed. And so it's a tragic end for the Targaryens and the dragons. It's poetic that both the men and women and the dragons of House Targaryen sort of fall together. It's a bit of a symmetry of tragedy and fate. But let's jump out of dragons here for just a minute, and we'll get back to Daenerys and George's original concept. But I want to talk about the fact that there are so many other houses that are symbolized by animals, some that are featured in the story, some that are alluded to, or some that are more historical. But let's just talk about some of them, and let's talk about them in the concept of this superpower and whether some of the other houses might have it. You've got the direwolves of Stark, you've got the lions of Lannister, the krakens of Greyjoy, the stags of Baratheon, and so on. But let's specifically focus on the Starks. We know that the very first original scene, the impetus for George writing these novels, was he had that scene come to him of Bran and company finding those direwolf pups in the snow. And that was a very early concept for him, obviously, that this ancient house finds its legendary symbol. Those creatures become an integral part of the story, and they really help to develop the Stark children. So do we think that George always had the warging ability associated with Starks? Is that something that he would have had when he was developing this original concept for Daenerys and the Targaryens? Did he have the warging ability as an original concept for the Starks?
Yes, I think so. Because it doesn't run into that same problem of, it's kind of, they can warg into the wolves, but ultimately they're just, some of them, they're just dreaming. They just think they're dreaming. The power is very limited. The wolves are not gigantic, winged, and breathe fire either, So they're very, they're grounded literally. I think that because it was still a fantasy when I guess he got around to the pitch letter, I assume. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or no, yep. The pitch letter was after the original concept.
Right, yeah.
Because I know originally it started out as a fictional or a historical fiction. So maybe not right out of the gates, but I think definitely before he decided to put the dragons in. I think he decided on that. And that's probably what helped him go over to the dragons as well. After he decided it was going to be a fantasy.
I mean, George has, and I am not very well read on his other works.
I'm not either.
Yeah, some people in the fandom are, but they've pointed out, and I'm trying to find where I saw, where they've pointed this out on Twitter, that basically warging is a concept that he's played with in the past in some of his other novels, and I can't remember, offhand what those are, but this is a concept that I think he's, wanted to work in, and even in his pitch letter, he talks about, the connection between the Starks, and, in the pitch letter, they had Catelyn and some of the Starks going north of the wall.
Right.
And fending off the others with the quote unquote savagery of the direwolves. And I think you don't get that if they're just, pets or just, companion animals. So I think that does betray kind of a, it's going to be a relationship that is, like you said, the first image in his mind is these kids coming around with these pups. So I do think that it is, he always had that in mind that the Starks would have this ability.
Yeah. And so with this ability, would we consider it a superpower in terms of the original concept for the Targaryens? And if it is a superpower, if warging is a superpower, again, why would he give the Starks this ability and not the Targaryens? And I'm talking about in the context of A Song of Ice and Fire now. Like, if warging is a superpower, and we talked about this a little earlier with Dany, that she has a connection to her dragons, but she can't really necessarily warg into them.
So they have to build a relationship with each of these animals, and certain animals are a lot harder to warg into, and it takes someone who's really mastered that, or someone who's more powerful, I guess, like Bran, to be able to do that. Or you have a really good relationship with the animal, and you're able to do it, maybe. And it seems like it's a lot harder for that to tap into that superpower than to conjure flames, pretty much.
Because Bran's like one of the first, right? Like he immediately starts slipping into
and I think that's also
summer.
Yeah, a factor of his injury and stuff. But
yeah, I was just going to say that. Is it because he's bedridden? Like that's kind of a ability that kicks on because he doesn't have his legs or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, John starts slipping into Ghost in his dreams, without being injured. So I think that's not a requirement to having your power unlocked. But back to the question of whether or not this is a superpower, I would say it depends. Like, because did Sansa ever have quote unquote a superpower with a lady? Like, she had a great relationship with her dog, but you can get that, just here in this world.
Yep.
By the point we get to Bran, where he's being able to warg into Summer and control him, then yes, it's a superpower. And so, I think as to whether or not why this and not dragons, it goes to the nature of dragons and that you can literally use them as tanks and go back into a medieval society. And obviously Grey Wind, in the battles that Robb wages, he is a force multiplier and panics enemy horses, kills dozens of men. But I mean, one fire blast from Drogon in a packed battlefield is going to kill like 3 times as many people as Grey Wind got in his entire campaigns. So I think that might have been like him. That might have been why George would have been okay with just doing, Starkling wargs versus pyrokinesis / dragons. And it also goes to imagery, in my opinion, is that you want to have that balance of imagery of like heraldic animals that you guys talked about at the beginning.
So I think that's a good point to make here, that some of the other animals that we see, and this is just coming to me, so if it's bad, we'll cut it. The dire wolves are of the north, the real north, beyond the wall. No one has seen them in a long time, and they're all these six pups, are alone. They sort of begin to symbolize the Starks later on. And the lion, the only instance that go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say real quick that like they've always kind of symbolized and it's an open question about whether they were meant, like the pups symbolize the Starks and their role in that, like all the like Ghost is found away from the pact and doesn't speak. That's like John. But then they also seem to take on the characteristics of their owners, in that like Shaggy Dog gets really wild. Grey Wind is a military, master. Lady is quiet and refined and gentle, and Ned is even thinking about that when he has to kill Lady. And Nymeria is very willful and loyal. And so those are, the kind of qualities that, it's a question of whether who's influencing who, and I think the kids are ultimately influencing those dogs. But it's very interesting how he does that. But go back to your point.
Go ahead, Brett.
Oh well, and then Nymeria dying early on, that kind of
lady
dying early on, kind of takes away Sansa's personality as that, and now she's becoming something different. Maybe that's what that symbolized. And it was from the early pitch letter, right, where she was supposed to like betray the Stark family and go with Joffrey.
That's a great catch. That Lady dying might have symbolized Sansa's,
her cutting ties.
Her Stark identity dying.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's a great point. I don't know if others have made it, but like something similar about that you see a lot of the early pitch letter, like for example Catelyn shivering when they talk about north of the wall, even though she
why
never
would
gets
why
there.
would she think about it?
Yeah, exactly. And so, but yeah, that could be a great thing. But that the dogs, the direwolves are obviously very much connected with the symbolism and the prophetics of the Starks.
When you see
And,
like Arya losing her identity when Nymeria runs away, and yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of.
But then Nymeria coming back and raging unholy vengeance upon
right,
just so
right,
many people could very much be foreshadowing for what Arya is going to do.
yeah,
And,
that's
and we are meant to be uncomfortable with what Nymeria is doing, and that she's killing a lot of innocent people in the Riverlands. Could be foreshadowing for what Arya is going to do, and that she's going to kill a lot of innocent people too.
right. And just some of the other symbolism, we don't really see lions in the story, but the only instance we really know in the story is of that lioness attacking maybe Tydos or Tybalt Lannister, which is where the Cleganes rise to prominence because they save him. That's sort of symbolic of the lion literally turning on lion. Could be kind of a foreshadowing for Tyrion and other things that happen within.
Yeah, that's a great catch. Like I've never thought of it that way. And again, this just goes back to like here we are 7 years later, and we're just now like
we're still The two other things that come to mind, and then we'll move back to direwolves and then back to dragons. But the stags, obviously it's a stag that's dead, that's killed the direwolf mother. We've known about that symbolism for a long time, that it was sort of foreshadowing the fall of the Baratheons. In the show, there's that great scene where Tywin is introduced, where he's skinning a stag.
On the show,
right on the show, right. Exactly. But one other thing, this just came to mind: the Krakens. We are hearing about them in the Winds of Winter sample chapters. We think they're going to rise up from the depths and begin to just tear down the Red Wine Fleet and all those fleets all those ships that Euron has chocked full of blood and magic and all that shit. The Kraken's coming into the story. It's kind of like the Greyjoys, just wreaking havoc on everything. Yeah. So that's just a side note, but yeah, I love fucking symbolism. Yeah. So
real nuisance.
To Brett's point, Brett made a point that one of the early or one of the reasons that George really wanted to ground this story in historical fiction. Maybe the reason dragons were absent, part of the reason dragons were absent is because they weren't real. Direwolves were real. George puts a lot of these very ancient creatures into the story. The elk that Cold Hands rides was actually something that would have been on mainland Europe and the British Isles and Ireland at some point.
Yes.
And we know that direwolves were real. So maybe that's just kind of another thing that one of the reasons he kept dragons off the page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I love the discussion about a potential clash between Dany and Jon, and we don't know if they're going to instantly connect or they're going to clash or how they're going to come together. But imagine those two with that Targaryen superpower meeting each other and either vying for the throne. It seems it could have gotten really far fetched.
Like how does Jon survive that? Like,
right.
And again, like, the question becomes, well, how does he survive the dragons? And the answer becomes like, well, the dragons kind of like have an affinity for him. Mm-hmm. And again, having the power be another being allows you to do a lot of interesting dynamics, and that's kind of one of the things we'll talk about later. But like, for example, when Ghost goes to Melisandre and Jon and looks at Jon like he's a stranger, quote unquote stranger, is definitely something that's interesting, which you don't get if his power is completely internalized, and that's definitely. And I think it's just another thing it's another piece for Martin to play with, whereas it's another piece on the board, and how he keeps track of all these pieces, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not just talking about like the eye color details that we all know that he doesn't remember, so he has to like go consult the wiki and his fellow, like his and I forget, Elio and I forget their two names, but the basically
Elio and Linda. Yeah.
yeah, Elio and Linda. Like he has them to help,
Mhm.
remember the specific details and things like that. But like just the major pieces, I have no idea how he keeps on the board. But it goes back to his ability to juggle all of those.
It's like that meme of Charlie from It's Always in Sunny, where he's got that board and all these connecting.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I imagine that like it's like Pentagon level, that George has a room that he's like, fuck, where does this connect?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And not only is he doing that, but he's doing it in a way that makes sense and is not.
Yeah.
And the level between doing it that it makes sense, doing it that it's satisfying, and doing it to the point that you have the kind of following he does is just incredible. But
yeah,
I think it goes back to the point of having it be dragons is just another piece for him to play with and allows you to do things that you're not normally like to do. And I was kind of saving this for later, but for example, if Dany has the power of telekinesis or pyrokinesis, then one of, like, say, Barristan's crowning moments of badassery, where he just fillets Miro with an ash staff, like, you don't have that. Like, if Dany just sees Miro and snaps his neck, like, that scene's over.
Yep.
So it allows her to be vulnerable when she's separated from her dragons, and so you get that moment with Barristan where everybody starts to realize, like, wait, this guy's not just a squire if he beat the hell out of Miro with a staff.
Yeah.
Does some of this telekinetic power, this pyrokinetic, all lumped into one superpowers, we're calling it, does it get transferred to Melisandre and the Red Priests and Priestesses in the story?
I think so, and you could kind of see where the negative aspects of it, like it's a PR problem having her around for Stannis in a lot of ways.
I mean, she doesn't have, like, none of them have, like, to our knowledge, pyrokinesis or telekinesis. I think, Stannis is not in the original pitch letter, and he's, I think, a character that comes about, like, very early on, because we have Ned thinking about him. We have Jaime and Cersei talking about him in one of Bran's chapter where he gets thrown. So he's very early on, but he wasn't in the pitch letter, and so for Mel, I think her powers are kind of separate from in terms of transfer because they're so different. Like they are fire magic, but I don't think they're kind of one to one with what
it could kind of be like a low magic equivalent of what he envisioned.
Yeah.
I mean, she does have that.
Yeah, Mel is absolutely the epitome of low magic in that it's an open question how much of her power is actually lore based versus her powders and shadow binding.
She takes credit for it. She does burn the Orwell's eagle. We're not really sure whether that's the Fire and Blood excerpt, whether the wall is a magical barrier that stops.
Yeah, she could have creatures. That's a great catch, Travis.
Or she just says, like she does with most things, takes credit for it and says, John gives her that look in that scene, and she's like, the talons of the Lord of Light are hot or something like that.
Yeah, talons are long. Like it could have been that, like, what we think happened with, like, Balon, Joffrey, and Robb dying. Like, a lot of people think that she saw that in her flames, and then she used the leeches to kind of continue conning, like, Stannis to get him ready to the point that he'll sacrifice Edric, and I subscribe to that personally. So it could have been that she saw that the power of the wall was going to, like, destroy Orell's eagle.
Well, yeah,
took credit for that, or she did it herself. Like,
or she did it, or she simply she didn't know anything about it, and she's quick like that when John says, Orell's eagle burst into flames, and then she looks at her, and well, it's kind of obvious, like, okay, well, he thinks it was me, so I'm going to take credit for it because the king's standing here. You know what I mean? Like she's just an opportunist in a lot of ways. Like, I don't think we'll talk about this on the Stannis episode probably, but I don't think I love that George says she's the most misunderstood character.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that goes back.
Purposeful. That's purposeful, obviously.
I think, though, I don't know. I think she did burn that eagle, and I think she does have those powers. I just think it obviously not what Dany would have had,
right?
But it's just that's probably the criticisms that he probably wrestled with. He gave it all to Mel because Mel's not inherently, she's not evil. She's just very wrong in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
I think we are going to see her do some crazy shit
I
eventually because she talks about not being at Blackwater. Like, what could she have done at Blackwater? And I feel like that was kind of George kind of being like, hey, when she comes on screen later, she might do a lot more, like, I don't know, some crazy shit. I don't know.
It's probably going to piss a lot of people off, but I'm totally down for a bunch of red priests and priestesses and the fiery hand coming in season 8 and just fucking throwing fireballs.
Yeah,
like Walker.
Yes.
How small a hand will be, like pumping their fists, like do it. Anyway,
that'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, like going back to Dany, I think it's just a function of another piece for them and her ability to kind of react and deal with those and build that relationship that George kind of wanted to play with.
Yeah, so let's talk about the pitch letter as we move into some of the more symbolism of what he may have been thinking with this original concept, and then we'll really begin to talk the comparative analysis of what this could mean for the story. So we know that was it last year before, someone took a picture of the original pitch letter that was on the wall of the publisher's Bantam's publishing house, and posted it. I don't think this letter was supposed to get out. There are segments that have been blacked out, probably the crucial elements of John and the end game and all that, or some of the things that we haven't seen yet. But this is obviously sent in 93, so I think he said he gets this vision of the dire wolves and the pup in like 90 or 91, and he begins to write it. So this is a couple years after he's kind of moved on. Maybe this original early concept isn't in the pitch letter, but I want to read the section on Dany because I think it imagine this with pyrokinesis. So here's the section, and to be fair, it was hard to make out some of the Dany section because there's a reflection of daylight or sunlight on the thing. But with the help of some of the fans on the Nauticast Facebook page, I think we have most of the words intact. So here's what the section says. Over across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen will discover that her new husband, the Dothraki Khal Drogo, has little interest in invading the Seven Kingdoms, much to her brother's frustration. When Viserys presses his claim past the point of tact or wisdom, he does a lot beyond tact or wisdom. Khal Drogo will finally grow annoyed and kill him out of hand, eliminating the Targaryen pretender and leaving Daenerys as the last of her line. Daenerys will bide her time, but she will not forget. When the moment is right, she will kill her husband to avenge her brother, and then flee with a trusted friend into the wilderness beyond Vaes Dothrak. There, hunted by Dothraki blood riders and in fear of her life, she stumbles on a cache of dragon's eggs. The birth of a young dragon will give Daenerys the power to bend the Dothraki to her will. Then she begins to plan for her invasion of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, obviously, there's no mention of telekinetic powers. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, as you read the original pitch letter, just because some people aren't mentioned doesn't mean that they're not there. But no mention of telekinetic powers here. Obviously, the dragon eggs are prominent, which means there's a dragon coming, as the text says. So again, very early concept with the telekinetic powers. But it's very interesting about the characterization here of Dany. She's going to seek revenge for Viserys' death here. That's something completely different than we see in the series. She flees into the wild alone and scared. In the story, she's alone and scared. She doesn't flee. She doesn't run. She takes on the mantle of being a Dothraki and uses it to her will. And she finds the eggs. She's not given the eggs. She finds the eggs. Which help her take over the Dothraki and set her on her course. So that really seems to me like a path of destruction and revenge. And if she has pyrokinesis, immediately what came to mind, and there may be other interpretations or other pop culture references that you may see to this, but I instantly thought of Stephen King's Carrie. Like that immediately came to mind when I read this and began to look at this text, that, Carrie is this unpopular high school misfit who's tormented, and she begins to develop this power and just exacts revenge on everyone, and actually leads to kind of a really terrible disaster in that story in her town. But just imagine that original pitch letter concept for Dany with the telekinetic powers. It can be really disastrous for her and for the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes to, kind of the questions that he does explore in terms of her, the scale of her powers, and also, is she able to control them? Like, she has issues controlling the dragons, but again, if the dragons don't respond to her, then they go off and just eat sheep.
Mm-hmm.
If she can't control her pyrokinesis, then she's going to be around people, and you're going to get a very Carrie situation. So I think it's very interesting how it'll lead to the conversations about what ultimately her responsibility is
Yes.
for the damage that these dragons are going to inevitably cause. Like, I think in the Winds of Winter, it's going to be at her behest that she's going to cause a shit ton of damage, whereas if it's pyrokinesis, it's inarguable that she's responsible for it. But if she's still learning her powers, like if she still has control over her powers, how then does it?
How does she use them?
How does she? Yeah, how does she use them? But like, if she's in control of her powers, she can't exonerate herself and chain that up. Like, and that goes to, again, a comparison of how the story would have shaped out in terms of disasters.
Mm-hmm.
The big disaster in A Dance with Dragons is that you have Drogon eating children. So then she chains her dragons, and that is a central motif and theme throughout her entire story in A Dance with Dragons, is that she has differing parties telling her to, and to kind of go off my own essay with Brown Ben Plum. Brown Ben Plum's like, yeah, the Yunkai have us outnumbered with all of these sellswords, and they have a bigger army, but we're okay. We got the dragons. She's like, no, I've chained my dragons. And you've got Dario saying you should unleash these dragons, and she just doesn't want to. If it's pyrokinesis, how do you have that? Like, how do you chain an internal ability that's part of you that might flare up if you get angry, like it does with your Carrie comparison?
Right.
So you take away kind of her central question in A Dance with Dragons. If she's chaining up her dragons, and you take that away and replace it with pyrokinesis, then I don't know how George does that in A Dance with Dragons.
Yeah, and you get. I wonder if that's like Ares, the Mad King, Ares the Second, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's kind of. Wonder if like his original vision was him literally burning people alive by himself, and Dany. I think she's eventually going to learn what her father was doing, because I still don't think she knows exactly what he was doing.
No, I mean, nobody's
books.
really been, and I think some people have, and I think Jeff has this theory that Barristan's going to turn cloak on her when he starts seeing that. You could have that moment where he tells her he's leaving, or right before he's leaving, that look, Dany, we never got around to this, but you're behaving like your father. Everything that your father, that you were told about your father, is true. Or Tyrion might be the one to do that to piss her off, and then redirect that anger towards like Aegon or
Cersei,
or somebody that he wants to like cut out of her council and everything else.
Yeah.
So
I feel like Tyrion's going to come along with his vengeance path and kind of push Dany towards that, because
absolutely,
Dany's going to come back wanting fire and blood too, and now she's listening to Tyrion, and that could potentially push Barristan away.
Tyrion's going to absolutely lie about like Aegon. Like, he's going to say like, oh, he sailed west and he's stealing your claim, like, because he told Aegon to do it in order to win her hand. He's going to tell Dany like, oh no, he's doing this to steal your claim, and nobody will be able to tell her different. And that's going to lead to the second Dance with Dragons, which will just be
Ooh.
an
You
enormous
think he'll
amount.
lie? You think he'll straight up lie?
Oh, he'll absolutely. There's nobody there to contradict him.
Well, what if he goes and he conquers Fagon conquers uh King's Landing, and then she gets there and he's like he won't give up his right to the throne, and then
Yeah,
she's
I mean,
I mean, he
that
may
could
not
happen,
lie.
but I think the conflict between, I think it's set up that the conflict between Dany and between Aegon is going to be a product of Tyrion
Well, yeah, I think it
telling
already.
him to
Yeah.
go west, and then he's gonna lie to Dany about why he went west,
Mm.
and that's gonna piss, and that will lead to her like burning Illyrio, and
Yeah.
then if Illyrio is his father or just his mentor, he's probably his father. But then once Aegon hears that Illyrio's dead at Dany's hand, it's not gonna matter what he wanted, and then he's gonna marry Arianne, which has been
That's got shades of Dance of Dragons all over it because
yeah, oh yeah, exactly,
because it kind of
Martin's
escalates like
referred to it as the second Dance of Dragons,
yeah.
and that's gonna be, you know,
it's because like it didn't start off that bad, and then something they kind of pushed each other a little bit, and then it started getting worse to where they're like murdering each other's children and yeah, because it yeah that's I like that now that yeah okay.
So let's do a what if scenario here, and sometimes people don't like to do these. I've asked a couple questions of our Not a Cast friends, and of course Jeff likes to point out to me that that wouldn't be a Song of Ice and Fire. I know that, but I still in the long night that we're in, let me have my fun.
I think what was it? Girls Gone Cannon's not the recent episode they released, but the last one. They were like they kept doing the like the AU references because they kept like shipping.
They go off on this a lot. I mean, I love it because they're so great to begin with, but when they get going and they feed off each other, it can go very far.
That's the charitable interpretation. No, I'm just kidding. I love both of them.
I think Mother Chloe is going to send you to your room now.
Well,
right?
I'm already in my room and I've got all my.
Okay, that's true. We'll report to her that you're.
I mean, that's better than what Ashay is doing to people that disagree with her now. She said she's gonna kill people now. Like in her, I think it was a live stream. She was like, "Yep, we're gonna have to murder you now."
She was saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's Chloe's a little more merciful. So you'd be okay.
So anyway.
Yeah. So anyways, so let's move into the final part of our analysis of this, and let's talk about not only the big differences between those two concepts, the original concept or the early concept, I should say, of telekinetic powers. Remember the original pitch when we're talking about that. At Dany, as we know her in A Song of Ice and Fire, and then at the end we're going to talk about the fate, what we see as the fate of Daenerys Targaryen, and you can talk about it with the telekinetic powers, if it's the same fate, whatever. But one of the things that really interests me is, and I think sometimes this is part of, and I hate to say it like this, but I think part of the dislike of Dany is real world sexism, but especially as we talked earlier about Stannis and misogyny and all that, sexism is a huge thing in this culture. Dany being a woman, being young, being naive, being foreign, leading slaves or freed slaves and foreign armies with dragons in the sky or on the back of dragons, that all is just a concoction of what's really going to turn off and especially if the red priests and priestesses name her Azor Ahai, she's coming to Westeros with a lot of baggage in their mind. If she's coming with telekinetic powers, she's already, and I think this gets back to your point just a little bit ago, Frank, that responsibility and control would be very important for how Dany utilizes those powers. and utilizes during her rule of Marine and everything. Imagine, if you will, that Dany arrives in Westeros with telekinetic powers. What happens?
I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of the same things that you see that you would see with dragons, because at this point it's just an otherization of Dany
Yes.
that is going to take place, that is even more that is just going to get hyped. Like, I feel like that's going to happen regardless of whether or not she's a woman, but like in terms of the otherization that's going to occur, it is also a function of her sex. And I want to point to, you know, some quotes that come from Cavo, I think is the name, and we might need to cut that out, but because I'm finding something. But okay, so yeah, it goes to, sexism and the perception of her as a conqueror. Any conqueror is going to be hit with this. And so you have, and I'm going to quote from the text, you have Cavo Nagaris, the guy who played the customs master in Chorus or near Volantis that plays Sivasi with
Yep.
Tyrion.
Yep.
And he says, if even half the stories coming back from Slaver's Bay are true, this child is a monster. They say that she is bloodthirsty, that those who speak against her are impaled on spikes to die lingering deaths, which is kind of true, but they were killed because they killed children.
Right.
But they say that she is a sorceress who feeds her dragons on the flesh of newborn babes, an oathbreaker who mocks the gods, breaks truces, threatens envoys, and turns on those who have served her loyally. And those are all things that you could lay at the feet of a male conqueror.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, and then this is obviously sexist, this part where they say her lust cannot be sated, that she mates with men, women, eunuchs, even dogs and children, and woe betide the lover who fails to satisfy her. She gives her body to men to take their souls in thrall, and that's a recurring motif over any powerful woman.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Before.
Yep.
I mean, and you even see shades of it these days, where any female reporter, any female politician gets lobbed these accusations that they slept their way to the top. So that's not even old society. It's still very much new. But then Halden says that these are all lies coming from the Yunkish. And then Cabo says, quote, the best calumnies are spiced with truth, but the girl's true sin cannot be denied. This arrogant child has taken upon her to smash the slave trade. And so the point that I want to make by bringing that up is that the real reason that they're using the sexism is because she's going after their economic system. If she shows up, if she went after the slave system with telekinetic powers versus dragons, and dragons are monsters and all those other things, she's still going to get hit with the sexism. So I think it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
In terms of, if she shows up as a conqueror, either in Essos or Westeros, it doesn't really matter the form of it. She's just going to get hit with that sexism and that otherization that comes with being the Targs. But one point I want to make real quick about the otherization is that Martin thought about another path to otherizing the not only the Targaryens but also the Valyrians as a whole. But this came after he had originally thought about it. He said, and it's from his Not a Blog post, where he said, "Oh wait, wrong one. Hang on."
By the way, I think you hit it right on. Whatever, hit it right on the head. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever that say. I'm so terrible with sayings, but yeah,
hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then so like just cut what I said before, and just go with right now. So Martin had thought about like the Valyrians and Targs being otherized a different way, but this was after he had already written the story, and this is from a Not a Blog post where he thought about them being black. And he said, speaking of Valyria, right from the start, I wanted the Targaryens, and by extension the Valyrians, from whom they are descended, to be a race apart, with distinctive features that set them apart from the rest of Westeros and helped explain their obsession with the purity of their blood. To do this, I made a conventional high fantasy choice and gave them silver gold hair, purple and violet eyes, fine, chiseled, aristocratic features. That worked well enough, at least in the books. On the show, less so. But in recent years, it has occurred for me from time to time that it might have made for an interesting twist if instead I had made the Dragon Lords of Valyria, and therefore the Targaryens, black. Maybe I could have kept the silver hair too, though no, that comes too close to dark elf territory. But still, if I had had dark-skinned dragon lords invade and conquer a dominant and dominate a largely white Westeros, though that choice would have brought its own perils. The Targaryens have not all been heroic after all. Some of them have been monsters, madmen. So, well, it's moot. The idea came to me about 20 years too late.
Wow.
And I think this feeds into another aspect of Dany's story in that you have orientalization of the associate cultures, and we never get a perspective about her actions in Slaver's Bay, not only just from someone against her, which would have been an interesting viewpoint, but we also don't get perspectives from people who serve her, like Grey Worm, Missandei, or
Yeah.
any of these other POVs that could have been done. So I think, George recognizes that if he had made the Targaryens and Valyrians black, it would have had some issues, and that's to his credit. But it's also, a recognition that he has had his own shortcomings
Hmm.
in this particular topic. So I think that could have been an interesting part, but I think the
Wow.
otherization of Dany from her powers is going to happen no matter what the powers take. But I just wanted to
Right.
kind of point that out as another issue of the otherization of Dany, and kind of that where it kind of cuts both ways in that she is otherized because of her powers, because of her lineage, but she also does it to the various lords of Meereen and that culture, and that's going to have dire impacts where her otherization of Meereen is going to combine with dragons plant no trees, and she's not going to conceive of them as people because of their resistance to her rule.
Right.
And you're going to get the next, you're going to get her coming back with Drogon and a horde of Dothraki, and she's just going to go just do awful shit in Marine.
Yeah, she's gonna
Yeah,
nuke him. I mean, she's gonna take him out.
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. I think I'm in complete agreement with what you said. I don't think I really have anything to add to that. I mean, I think it would have been a probably more of a bad choice uh, to change Danny's race because it,
I think a writer of Martin's talents could have pulled it off, but I'm
yeah,
hesitant to say that simply because of the issues that we do have
Right.
in Slaver's Bay and kind of his handlings of the cultures there, where you do have kind of and the thing is Martin recognizes these that
yeah,
he didn't want to make, like, because if you have Makar the Cruel, who's black, or even worse, say you have like Aerys the Fourth and all the things he does, and he's black, and that's just gonna. I mean, we see it in fantasy meta culture and all the things else. Like Game of Thrones already has problems with certain elements of the fandom who are, not great on the scores of like race and things like that.
yeah.
But it's just, I think those would have been heightened if he had made that choice, or maybe it would have helped. I don't know
I
in terms of like
he
having
definitely
conversations.
he definitely lacks like people of color in his story, but it is a like it's a European type thing. But yeah, that's where he falls short.
I think
And the
it's not that.
POVs.
Yeah, it's not that he doesn't have interesting characters of color, because he does have Missandei. He
No, he
does
does. He
have.
does.
Yeah, he does. It's just that we don't get their perspectives a
Right.
lot, and not just their perspectives for the sake of their perspectives, but their perspectives in dealing with other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
In that,
Yeah.
Dany, like Valyria is ancient Rome and a horrific version of ancient Rome,
Right.
and so having that legacy with Dany of her, and where she's kind of inverting it and that she's being anti-slavery, but you still have the legacy of the Giscari basically being the Carthage to Valyria's Rome and being
Right.
destroyed, and then you have that same person coming back and doing the same things of destroying their societies, and you're like, well, that's not great in how they would react to it. And so, and again,
Yeah.
that's another skill of Martin does, and where he has the reaction of the Sons of the Harpy is, if it's not morally good, it's at the very least understandable, if not predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see its faults, and it's because I mean, because
Yeah,
some
it's very
people,
interesting. It's an interesting thought experiment.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like some people give Danny the white savior type issue. They throw that issue out there, and that definitely is an issue. But then if you inverse it, uh, then yeah, there's just a multitude of different problems.
Well, and
But I think George does a good job of it. But yes, there are
I mean, she does have like
minor stuff in there. That's
yeah, she does have white savior motifs, and again that would be present no matter if she had telekinetic powers or if she had dragons.
Right.
But she kind of subverts them a lot of ways in that she fully integrates her, like she integrates very hard into the, like for example the Dothraki culture. Like,
yes, yeah,
and one of her most badass moments where she tells, and the Nauticast just went over this, is when she tells Viserys, "You have no right to a braid. You've won no victories." That's her,
Right.
not just being a white saber. She's internalizing
hmm
a very significant part of Dothraki culture. And then
Mhm.
she also has Missandei, who is a former slave, who is basically her Davos, who is a young child of color, who also gives her great counsel. And then you have Brown Ben Plum, who's quote unquote a mongrel, which
yeah,
of the free cities, which that word is not great, but again, it's a word that people of that time and of that universe would discuss
Right.
somebody who is like Brown Ben Plum, and so you do have those people around her. But again, I could certainly see why people throw that at her. But it has to be said that if you're gonna, it's better to be a savior than a slaver.
Yeah.
yeah, and she another thing that subverts it is she does actually care for those people. She does care what happens to them. It's not just, hey, I did this so I could take a picture with these foreign people.
Yeah, she's not
Yeah.
she's not peace coring it for a summer.
Yeah.
And
So-
because if she was going to, she would have taken her picture with the liberated slaves and then
Yeah.
then
Yeah,
left
she
the
would've
Marines
got-
to go
See
back
ya.
to Westeros.
Yeah,
Yeah, she would have
yeah.
gotten the
she
hell
would have
out
done
of Marine.
she would have done her pity vacation and come back.
Yeah. So
And so the fact that she stays is, it is like, again, maybe it is a savior, but it's her saying is like, look, I broke it, I'm going to buy it. And so,
Right.
yeah.
which, more than you could say
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, I
foreign
think
policies.
that's a perfect analogy. She broke it. Now she's got to buy it. She's got to see it through because she already messed up with the what wasn't it Valanus or
Yunkai.
Young was it Yunkai? What's the didn't she invade another city and
Astapor.
Astapor?
Well, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So she kind of
She
just
left the council, and so this was going through when we were talking about not the the ASOI read through on Twitter, where she thinks I left, when she's thinking about King Cleon the Butcher, and she's like, I left you a council of a scholar, a healer, and a priestess, and as your ruling council. And the thing that I got a really good response with from Twitter is like, well, you didn't leave them any soldiers. So what do you
Right.
think
Yeah.
was going to happen? And
Yeah.
again,
Right.
that goes. And again, I'm, I am criticizing her, but the fact is, she's a kid. And the fact
Right.
that none of her advisors were like, "Hey, leave like, 500 unsullied here,"
Right. Right.
like, or at least like 50 of them for bodyguards for your new council. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
do any of that. And I think this is a point that needs to be pointed out by Dany. She has the worst advisors of any of the
And
rulers.
she has so many, and she's getting more. And
Like, Tyrion's going to be a good advisor in
Right,
terms of
but-
strategy, but not morals.
right,
She
more.
ha-
Yeah, exactly. And
she
he's going to
has
have
nobody who
he's
is
going to have
equivalent-
selfish motives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She has nobody who is as good as Davos is for
Right.
Stannis, obviously, because Davos is the best advisor of any.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
He's the best advisor in any fictional series
Yeah.
ever. He has nobody who's as good as Catelyn is for Robb.
Yes.
Oh
yes.
yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good.
he has nobody who's as good as like Mathis Rowan or Randall Tarley in terms of strategy.
I mean,
that
even
Renly
Ned to Robert.
Yeah,
was-
Ned to Robert is a good hand. I mean, you don't have anybody like
Pycelle.
Pycelle. I mean, here's the thing,
I was-
Pycelle. But the thing, you might
Well,
be
he-
laughing about
No, he
like
actually-
a Game of Thrones
Yes.
Pycelle, but in a
Brett-
Feast for Crows Pycelle,
Yes. Yeah.
he's probably a better advisor than anybody. Like, 'cause think
Brett-
about her advisors. She has Barristan,
Yeah.
who is good for nothing but warfare, and even then, that's iffy.
Mm-hmm.
And morally speaking, he's Grandpa Nuremberg. This goes back to, yeah. No, he is. He literally is just like, I was just following orders. He's like, yeah, great.
Yeah.
You watch people burn to death, ass. And then you have Barristan, you have the Shave Pate, who's a
Right.
sadist. You
Right.
have Resnek, who is going to betray her. You have the Green Grace, who is literally leading the insurgency
Yeah,
against
uh-huh.
her. You have Missandei, who is great, but ultimately
in comparison to all the others, she doesn't have.
Yeah, and she has nobody who tells her leave some Unsullied there.
Right.
Why are you not killing the slavers in Yunkai? Why are you not dispossessing the slavers and making new lords?
She could have just left Strong Belwas there, and everything would have been fucking fine.
Yeah. No, as a personal bodyguard, because the reading of that series is that King Cleon comes in and just kills those counselors on trumped up charges. If you have Strong Belwas and like 10 Unsullied, that doesn't happen.
Right.
And then you don't get the war with Yunkai. Well, maybe you do because the Yunkish march south, but at least they don't march into the face of that shit show. But again, that is a criticism of Dany that, that's the fault of her advisors because, again, she is a kid. Right. And I think that's true. And again, this would be true if she had dragons or if she had pyrokinesis.
Right. Exactly.
It is funny, though, because, we were talking about Pycelle in A Feast for Crows with Cersei couple episodes ago.
On our Orain Waters, because we were Pycelle's actually telling her good advice, and she won't even listen to him.
Yeah,
that's her MO throughout the series.
Oh well, yeah, but still, we were just going back and reading it. We were like, oh my god, I can't believe Pycelle actually said something intelligent. I'd forgotten about that.
Well, I think it might be a question of the fandom has basically said that Pycelle is an idiot. It might be that he's giving shit advice because he's advising a Baratheon.
Yeah.
In Robert, who is not the Lannister. Then once a Lannister takes over, he gives great advice.
He kicks it. Like he's like, okay, I have to go to. It's like going to work. It's like I have to actually go to work. The boss is there today. Yeah. I gotta help this person out.
If I undermine Robert, Tywin will give me a gold star. If I undermine Cersei and the Lannisters, he's gonna kill me.
It's kind of funny when Cersei chooses not to listen to anybody, she does terribly. And then it's kind of Dany, when she chooses not to listen to her advisors, she starts kicking ass,
Yeah, I mean, and again, it goes back to the fact that she has just awful advisors.
I think we're all in agreement that whether it's in Essos or Westeros, regardless of the early concept with telekinetic powers or riding on the dragon as she does, she's going to arrive with the same skepticism and the same misogyny and the same barriers to her rule. What about her fate? I think for me, Dany seems like she's very fleshed out from the beginning. George knew exactly. I mean, and it's very surprising. This is like we've talked about. This is a 13-year-old girl that he knew, which I think obviously in my mind raises her to one of the main protagonists of the series. But he knew where he wanted to go with her from the beginning. She has even when she's down and out, she has a strong sense of herself. She's got that skepticism of Viserys. She's got Frank, to your point, she's got prophetic dreams coming to her. She's
not just the skepticism of Viserys, but the skepticism of Illyrio.
Right.
And that, nothing that Illyrio gives is free.
Absolutely.
That's a great point that, she understands that Illyrio's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. And
she's very observant.
Very perceptive for a 13-year-old.
Yeah. Exactly. She's got the dragon dreams. She's got she kind of instantly knows what the dragon eggs could be. Again, that could be prophetic. She also, and like we mentioned, the Nauticast guys going through Dany's chapter, she instantly begins to try and meld the two worlds of being a Valyrian and being a Dothraki. Like she starts to meld those two worlds.
Yeah, I think Dany is very indicative of something that's kind of a recurring theme throughout the series is synthesis, and the ultimate synthesis is going to be ice and fire with and that's Jon with Rhaegar and Lyanna, and will ultimately probably be Jon and Dany. Synthesizing there, but Dany is in herself a synthesis of multiple cultures, and she does the best she can of that, and she's also internally a synthesis of two desires of being maternal and protective and helpful, and to the downtrodden, to lift up the downtrodden, which, that'd be amazing for her and Stannis to discuss, their mutual impulses for the
Hmm.
downtrodden who've been giving short end of the stick. But then she also has, the impulse of the dragon that she does want to kill Robert. She does want to kill Ned. She does want
Right.
to kill Stannis and Tywin. And she does want to kill the slavers and do all these other things. And so it's a recurring theme throughout the series, and but her especially, of how do you reconcile all of these things, which again goes back to George's biggest point, that the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And she has that over and over and over
Yep.
again, herself personally, herself in a cultural aspect, and then herself in a metaphysical aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So since we believe, and I think we've given ample evidence that George knew from the beginning where Dany, who Dany was and where she was going, what do you think her fate is? And you can be as narrow or as broad as you want to be. I mean, we've already talked about kind of a dark arc in the Winds of Winter. Talk about whatever you want to when it comes to her fate, either her what we're going to see in the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, or her ultimate fate. I mean, whatever you want to talk about, but talk about that.
I see. I feel like I don't know. I'm on the fate that she's gonna ultimately die, sacrificing herself for something. A lot of people think John, but I think it's actually gonna be her. And then John was that, the true heir that was secretly hidden all this time in plain sight. And I'm assuming John has something to do with her death. I don't think he's literally gonna stab her through the heart with a burning sword. I'm not, but maybe he kills her by impregnating her and she miscarries and it kills her, or she dies during childbirth, like her mother. I don't know. I mean, but
And some
I
of the
think George definitely has a plan though for her.
I think he does too.
That was there from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I
And I
think
don't
there's a
think
way
it's changed.
George,
Sorry.
yeah, I think there's a way George can do it that it's satisfying that she dies in childbirth, and then the bittersweet ending is that Dany dies in childbirth, and then John has to raise their child without her. My only issue with that, and this is something that some of the, like, I think Chloe and some of the
Mm-hmm.
other members of the fandom have pointed out, is like, can every significant mother in the series die? John's
Right.
mother, Dany's mother,
That's
Tyrion's
true.
mother.
Yeah.
Like, and he has a problem with, like, kind of, we don't get a lot of mothers. I mean, Catelyn's obviously an exception to that, and it's a great exception. But like, for significant characters, we don't get their mothers, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
does every comic book hero's mother have to die? And so, like, if he does that with Dany, I mean, I feel like, again, I have absolute confidence in George's ability to do that and do it in a satisfying way. I just think it'll be repetitive. And
Yeah.
so I think her dying because she sacrifices herself to, that's kind of a cliche. I could see it happening that way. I could see the bittersweet ending being that she actually lives, that like John, like they consummate their marriage and she has a child by John, but John's the one who sacrifices themselves, so it's bittersweet
Yeah.
that she didn't get that. I mean, I can see a lot of endings
Yeah.
for her. I do. She's either going to die, and I actually think it would be more satisfying if she doesn't. Like, if she's the one who has to be faced with the problems of rule after she's done all of the awful stuff that we think she's going to do in the Winds of Winter. And I think she pulls back from that when she's faced with kind of her inversion in Euron. And I'm basically cribbing straight from poor Quentin slash Emmett in this,
Mm-hmm.
in that Euron is an inversion of Bran metaphysically, but he's also an inversion of Dany in that he wants to bring back like Valyria in terms of its magically powered slaving, atrocity committing empire.
Yeah.
And Dany's gonna see that after she blows Team Aegon to pieces, and she's gonna be like, you know what? No, I'm not going down this. It's gonna be like Luke in the dark side at the Return of the Jedi, where she's like, "Yeah, I used anger to defeat my foe, but this is way too much."
Yeah.
And then she'll pull back from that, and then she goes north, and then she ultimately battles the others. Not in time to save Stannis, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
I mean, maybe she. I think that is a meetup
Oh
that
yeah.
that I think has a 1% chance of happening. It requires Stannis to survive the coming of the others, Dany to get there in time, and then him to meet her. And again, Emmett's theory, Poor Quentin's theory is that he does.
I
Not that he meets her, but he does survive and he becomes the Lord Commander. But that's a meetup that I would find fascinating. But
I
again,
I like that because if Stannis has to surrender, um, he knows he still has a duty to protect the realm. So
yeah, would he surrender his
I
claim? Like, could that be the ultimate expression of his belief in duty to the realm? That the
Hmm.
realm requires me to recognize another sovereign? Like, that's fascinating. That's another, again, huge philosophical question. But again, this is just me inserting Stannis and everything. But no,
yeah.
I think for Dany, I think her ultimate fate, I think her ultimate fate is to me less important than
Her
her
journey.
doing her yeah, exactly, her going to the depths of, I'm going to blow up the largest city in Westeros to destroy my enemies, and then being faced with Euron and all the temptations that he represents as a devil figure, and pulling back from that.
Yeah.
And then whether she and John get it on, or whether she, finds happiness with him only to have it taken away by either her death or his death, I think is less important than the lessons and the impact that she has in, reaching, like, wielding the quote unquote dark side, but then rejecting it.
I
It's a
feel
very
like
Luke Skywalker esque journey.
I feel like Tyrion's on that same journey, and
Yes.
I saw someone on
Although if he
Twitter.
kills Penny, he's irredeemable.
Yeah,
Like,
no, I
let's
don't
just get
think
that out of the way.
I don't know if he'll do that, but I mean he might.
Oh,
But
he's going to. He's absolutely
you
going
think
to.
you think he'll murder? I didn't, but anyway, so but I forget what it might have been Chloe or Eliana talking about how Tyrion might get his tongue cut out. And I mean that's not their theory if it was
I
them, and
think is it.
it might have
It's
been
the
on,
quiet line theory. I mean, I don't know who.
but I know, but then I think they also followed it up with saying I'd always thought maybe he'd find peace, but maybe him getting his tongue out
Oh, it's ham
causes
fast. No,
well
I'm sorry.
maybe him getting
Okay.
his tongue cut out ultimately causes him, not that causes him to find peace, but he can't do all the witty crap that he says to everyone because he always talks about how his tongue gets him in trouble. So that could be like a bittersweet. It may not be him. I don't know. That's kind of pushing it because I'd be pretty upset if my tongue was cut out. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that one shakes out. I mean, and again, it is.
and that's just me speculating
Yeah.
in weird directions. But I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think I do think she dies. I don't think the childbirth thing happens.
It may not.
I
I
could
mean,
see that happening in the show.
the only reason I said
But-
childbirth is I just don't see John physically killing her. Like I don't.
Oh no,
think
he's definitely not going to do that.
he's going to have something to do with it. I think it'll be totally accidental, or maybe she comes to help him or something, and that gets her killed. Because maybe the prophecy can be read loosely. I don't know, but
I think this theory of Stannis marching out from Winterfell to face the others and ultimately falling is his fate.
Yes.
But I think the person who then fulfills that is Dany, but she doesn't survive that conflict for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, and I think it could be that, like, they fly north to the heart of winter, and only John comes back.
Yeah,
Is the potential there? Because I think we're gonna see the heart of winter is what GRM has hinted at.
yeah.
In that, with Bran, he might see it through the eyes of the dragon that Tyrion's riding or something, but we're gonna see the heart of winter somehow. And I think it could be that, instead of having to kill the Night's King to destroy the army of the dead, you have to go north to the heart of winter and burn it out. And you might not survive that journey. So
Yeah.
that could be ultimately that conflict and how that ends, where they defeated the army of the dead, but the others are going to still keep coming until you deal with the, the heart of winter, and that could be how Dany dies. I don't know. It's just I just think it's she can have a satisfying end if she dies or lives, and again, that goes back to what I say, that her journey to me is ultimately more important than
Yes,
her.
and that's what I was going to say. That along the same parallels as Stannis, that her sacrifice for us as the readers will see her both as a heroic and a tragic character because of what she does in the Winds of Winter and potentially in part of A Dream of Spring.
Yes.
I feel like
sorry.
Sorry. I didn't. No, you
continue. In world, I don't know how she's going to be viewed. I don't know.
I mean, it kind of depends on like who survives, who tells her tale, who you know.
Hamilton. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like Sam's gonna.
Yeah, I mean, Sam
have a big hand in that.
Like,
yeah.
Sam's clearly the self-insert.
Right.
So
he's both the self-insert and then the parallel to Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of Lord of the Rings, I feel like maybe the Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring, you're gonna see all these characters converge, but then I feel like there's going to be a split off where it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, where you got people defending the South, but then you got like this secret op mission to burn the Heart of Winter or do something in the Heart of Winter to destroy the others with like a small group of people. I feel like that's going to happen, and so maybe I'm not sure how that's going to play out. Who's going to go north and who's going to stay to protect the lands?
Mm-hmm.
It could be Dany stays south and ends up dying trying to, kind of like the king. I forget his name in Lord of the Rings.
No,
Aragorn.
the one that Aragorn. It's Theoden.
Theoden.
Oh yeah, the Rohan.
Rohirrim.
Yeah, Rohirrim. But yeah. So it could be something like that. I don't know.
And I think that's all of this is in keeping with it. There was a recent article or recent interview with George. I think it was the New York Times Life section or something, where he said something that he believes heroes are important. Like, while it doesn't seem like, he's dealing with good and evil, he believes heroes are important, but he also believes that it's important to realize the heroes have flaws. Some serious flaws at times, but ultimately they should be viewed as heroic, and that's important for our society.
Yeah, and it goes back to his questions about like more morality and grayness, in that, like if Dany does blow up King's Landing and everybody there, but then she goes to the Heart of Winter and saves humanity, how do you view her? And I think that's a question that he doesn't want answered. He wants everybody to kind of come up with their own determinations.
Yeah, I think he wants people to think about that question and kind of really analyze it, kind of like his characters are doing. I mean, a lot of Jon and Dany and Stannis and all kinds of people are just wrestling with, even Rob and Catelyn. I mean, I don't know. All these characters, most of the characters are wrestling with, morally what's right. Is killing one to save a million the right way to go? And if you kill one person and it saves a million, was that just, or was it not? Is it still evil? I feel like a lot of people wrestle with that and so many other things, but yeah, and then they all have their personality flaws and their societal ingrained problems, like the sexism and the misogyny and the racism and all that, and the failure to understand another culture. They got to wrestle with all of that too. So xenophobia, I don't know. Hopefully that came out in a coherent way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
All right. Well, this is a great discussion.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
When we first started talking about this topic, I was like, this won't lend itself to anything. It was just a crazy idea, but I think it's a very fascinating discussion because it looks like George had some original ideas that he abandoned, but some foundations that he's stuck through to the end. And as we've talked about on this episode, even with those minor changes, even with those, potentially, I shouldn't say minor, but potentially major differences of dragons versus telekinetic powers, ultimately it's about the characters, and the characters are probably, they may have different paths in different AU versions of the story, but the ultimate fate is probably going to be similar. And I think that's great for us to recognize that even though the wait has been so long for these books, that George has set these men and women on a great path that we're going to be analyzing for years and years and years to come.
Absolutely.
So, Frank, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes,
My pleasure. It was very enjoyable.
We all love to give each other hell on Twitter and have fun with each other, but you're really contributing greatly to the fandom.
Thank you.
In your essays and in your analysis, and watching you interact with the ASOIF read through. I love it. You're
all caps.
You're all caps. You're your game is good, man.
Thank you.
So we're going to have you back for the Stannis episode.
Definitely.
We're making that announcement now. Well, hopefully we can have that soon. That Frank needs to get off his ass and quit worrying about law school and get to work on this Stannis Baratheon essay. Sorry, I revolted. I apologize. But yeah, no, man, we completely understand, and it just makes it that much sweeter. That could be the Christmas present.
Yes.
Or some the New Year's present, something like that.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for listening. Again, thank you, Frank, our special guest tonight. Frank, tell them where they can find you. Where are you on Twitter and social media, and where they can find your writings?
Yeah. As of right now, you guys are really inflating my writings. I only have the one essay other than my rants on Reddit. You can find me at Sir Donald Peasbury. I only have the one thread. It's about Brown Ben Plum. I'm working on expanding that. If you want less coherent but more voluminous writings, I'm on Twitter at FRANKBUMB. It's just my real name. I don't have a snappy little handle, but that's me. So I do want to warn people that it is football season, so you might not get as much ASOIF content as you hope for. So that's just a buyer beware note on that. But thank you guys very much for having me, and I look forward to being back on the Stannis episode once I get that essay done.
Watching you have meltdowns over the Buckeyes is my life as a Mountaineer fan for 25 years. So
I actually have a really
Brett
good...
tells me I'm a Michigan fan. I'm never coming back.
No, I'm not. Actually, I'm not really big into watching sports. I like sports. I like playing sports, but I'm not big into watching. I don't know. But anyways, I do have a friend, and his dad is from Ohio, and he's a huge Buckeyes fan. But then his brother-in-law is a huge Georgia fan, and they're always talking crap to each other. Because I don't know. I think they play every once in a while, don't they? I could have that wrong.
No, I don't think they've actually ever played Georgia and Ohio State.
I don't know. I don't know why they have a feud then, but that's weird.
Oh, it's probably just the Ohio State fans versus the SEC fans. That's
probably yeah. I don't know.
Now we've gone way off the rails for an ASYF podcast.
I'm cutting my my ignorance about football out of this.
It's nice when you're the editor, huh?
Yeah, it is. I can, but yeah. No.
So again, Frank, thank you. Brett, tell the folks where they can find us on social media and where they can listen to us.
All right. Well, you can find us on, or Well, you can find us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at Planetos Podcast. And on Facebook, you just search Planetos Podcast, will pop up. You can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, and any other platform that supports the RSS feed. You can also email us at planetospodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions or ideas or complaints. You know, I mean,
the complaint department is closed.
I mean, we were three white males sitting around talking about, sexism and racism and stuff. So if we missed anything or got something wrong, feel free. I mean, we're not trying to stay ignorant, so
No.
we will listen. And
I do want to, and on that point, I do want to reiterate that in a lot of ways, the ASOI fandom has been very eye-opening on a lot of those fronts, and so I do appreciate that aspect of the fandom. And for example, especially in my readings of Sansa, where I was never a Sansa hater, I just didn't find her as interesting.
Yeah,
and then,
same here.
And then reading the perspective of a lot of writers, and this Chloe from Girls Gone Canon was a big influence on that, and reading Sansa in a different way, and I've come to enjoy her a lot more in that regard. I always did love Brienne, though. Brienne was always on my top 5, but that doesn't absolve me of my earlier stuff. But no, on a serious note, I do appreciate the fandom's perspectives on that and how it's helped me kind of read not just ASOIF better, but also just real life things differently.
You do bring up a great point that the fandom, in being a huge Star Wars fan, and what happened to the Star Wars community over the past year or so. And actually, looking at some of your stuff, Frank, you and I may disagree about The Last Jedi, but yeah. We'll have the dueling podcast. Anyways, this community is very supportive of each other. I mean, yes, there are some people out there that we've interacted with, whatever, or you get the person that says something just completely terrible or whatever. But by and large, I think it's just the breadth of the fandom, but also the breadth of the story that like you said, we have all of our likes and our dislikes, but you can really hone in and appreciate other folks' love for certain characters or certain scenes, certain moments that you didn't think about, and you can enjoy it through their eyes. And I think that's a great thing about this fandom.
Yes, I absolutely love this fandom. I mean, this Star Wars fandom, so like it's like talking like politics, in public. Like you can't even like you're. Yeah, it's just it's terrible. Like that's why I've kind of cut myself off from it. Like, and it kind of sucks because I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Me too, and I'm just very quickly, and I don't know if you guys need this for the pod or not, but I'm not a fan of The Last Jedi, and I have my beefs with that. But the people who went and like harassed Rose's actress, excuse me. I mean, they're basically like, A, you're the scum of the earth, but B, you must lead such an uninteresting life.
Yes,
regardless of your criticisms, like if that's what you have time to do, like come on, man. There's so many other productive things you could do with your life.
Yeah, but that's a great point, Brett. That it does remind me a lot of politics this day. That everybody has to have an opinion, everybody has to attack, everyone has to be pissed off about something that's occurred, and it's just not helpful. But anyways, that's another time. But I am Frank bummed that you are not going to Ice and Fire Con, because I am planning, and actually I my wife doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to talk to her tomorrow. I may drive to Jersey City for that event.
See that I'm like, depending on when that happens, I might try and do that. But
Monday, November 19th.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not happening.
Yeah.
That's not a.
Well, what kind of spurred me on is the fact that Nauticast announced they were going to have a meetup.
Oh yeah.
At a bar right across, and I was like, oh man, I'd really like to go just to meet Jeff and Emmett and all the folks that we interact with in that. but and it's Thanksgiving week, so actually where I work is mostly closed. I can take some extra days off. But anyways, like
Yeah.
I want to go to that.
I mean, you can cut this from the cast too, but like I have class that Monday and
Yeah.
Tuesday, so I couldn't go
Yeah.
even if I wanted to. And if my dad found out that I blew off class, like he's not paying for my education, but it wouldn't matter because he would still fucking kill me if he learned I blew off class to go get drunk in Jersey fucking City with some nerds I've never met in real life. He would play me. He would make what Ramsay did to Theon seem tame if he learned that's what I did the week of Thanksgiving.
I don't even have class, but I think this is what I'm going to face tomorrow when I beg Lindsay to let me go.
Well, Godspeed to you.
When is this?
It's Monday the 19th.
Of November?
November, yeah.
I thought it was around... dang. Yeah, that's not something I can do, but...
Yeah, it's really. I mean, it's like a 5.5 hour drive from here, but
that's not
I know how far of a drive. Like it'd probably be like 10 or 12 for me.
Yeah, you'd probably like 9 or 10 hours. I would think of well, maybe 10 or 11 actually.
I'm just like Nashville's like I think it's 2 hours away.
Yeah, so, you're good for Nashville. I can't because that's my
mine would be about
anniversary.
Mine would be about 8 hours, which I've done. I can do that, but like not during class. Like if it was a Saturday, I'd probably
I definitely do want to go to Ice and Fire Con, and I will definitely have money. So I'm definitely going.
Here's the thing, and this happened last year. It happened this year, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen next year because there's only 3 years of law school. But it is happening in the smack dab in the middle of my spring exams.
Yeah.
And my point is like not even just my dad, but my point is like people have said it was like, well, you can come, hang out for a couple hours and then go back. And the point that I make is that if I'm not studying during that time, if I'm not studying or sleeping during exams, I will be such a nervous wreck that no one will want to hang out with me. Not that anyone does to begin with, but I will be just that much worse if I'm not studying during that time. So I'm just like hoping that they always keep it in that location because I think it's been a long-running location there. And
it has, yeah.
Yeah, so if like not this year or next year, but after that year, I'll be a working professional and I can take that weekend off and do it then, and that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well, I've been Brett. Again, follow me at HomiePillow on Twitter, and
And I've been Travis. Follow me at Sir_Travis on Twitter. See you around Planetos.
You can find all of our links down below in the description or wherever it is. The intro music is Jungo's Test, and that's by myself and Dylan Rivas. His links will be down in the description, and the outro song is Smack by Bleach Garden. Don't worry about pauses or anything. I edit that.
Yeah, we can edit out anything.
Yeah.
Well, not any.
Well.
that I like Sansa's arc. I think she's going to do great things. But why is it? All I'm saying is, why is it that of every character in the series, and I'm being legitimate here, Stannis is the only person whose trauma gets negated. Like,
Yeah.
like Ned's trauma, Sansa's trauma, Arya's trauma, all of them, we recognize that, and that's good and that's healthy. But Stannis nearly starved to death as a teenager.
Right.
The patriarch of his family is Robert, which is not healthy. He's got Renly, who's a little piece of shit as a younger brother, and he saw his parents die, and that's just 4 things right there.
And you know, the people that go on about him being ambitious, if he was fucking ambitious, he would have surrendered Storm's End.
Oh yeah,
and let the Tyrells and the Redwynes go north, and they would have crushed Robert, and he would have been golden.
I mean, he's Lord Paramount of the Trident, or not the Trident, the Stormland.
Well, it's funny too because he's like, I don't even know why my brothers wanted this throne so bad. Like he doesn't even want the throne. He's just like, it's mine.
Text. It's not even like it's not even like when D&D fucked that up. They're not fucking up subtext. They're fucking up text.
Right.
That's what's But I'm sure we'll get all into this.
Oh, yeah, like now my blood pressure is way.
I would seriously love to be like have a heartbeat monitor like when I'm discussing Stannis versus when I'm discussing other characters. And please, and I know you guys are aware of this, and it doesn't sound like we'll be that, demanding, but this is literally my first podcast of any kind.
That's what most of our guests have. I think Pat had been on another podcast before, but we've had several guests that are brand new. I mean, we're brand new to this, so
yeah, excellent. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate the invite. It's very, very, very flattering, and I'm sure I'll say nice things eventually. But Brett, here's the thing about Brett is like I know he was trolling me earlier, but I've already subconsciously said like, well, Brett doesn't like Stannis. so like even though like I know he's a fan of the One True King, that first like mental image is just.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ruined it for you.
You're just
you're fine.
You're gonna have to go on Twitter and you're gonna have to tag that one Stannis account and just let it out in the open. So that guy,
that Stannis account, it gets kind of weird. It gets kind of weird. It gets kind of weird a little bit. And so that's all I want to say. That's like I like that account. I enjoy it, but ultimately. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, whoever it is has a hard on for Jeff and Nemeth.
Yeah, I mean I do too. Well, yeah. Who among the fandom doesn't? But yeah, and part of the weirdness is how they interact with Jeff, and Jeff and Emmett, to their credit, lean into it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But sometimes it gets weird. Really
weird. Jeff is our favorite cave troll.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was phenomenal. I look forward to listening to all of this with, all my bullshit cut out. So, thank you guys for doing that. And
you might be disappointed because I really do like your rants and your So I don't know.
Most of our stuff stays in. I mean, because we're just like, that's great. Let's
it's like
okay.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's like
again, I do have I have an outline for the Stannis essay that I'm doing, and it's not a broad essay. It's just comparing him to a historical figure. Because I feel but I feel like the good thing is that it's for the implications of Stannis's life, like basically his end game and what it's going to look like because of what happens to this historical figure that he kind of parallels.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you gave me the inspiration, and I immediately started writing, and I actually pulled Hannibal and Agamemnon and.
Yeah, there's a guy on Twitter who like makes the Agamemnon parallel a ton. I mean, LML does as well. But for me, it's basically the Hannibal, and it's actually not like the Winterfell where they're like Stannis is at the gates type thing.
Right.
It's actually comparing his victories.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So
right, and that's what I really want. That's what you'll be great. Like what I did is. There's another I took a lot because Shakespeare of Thrones did a really great analysis of him compared to Macbeth.
Yes.
There's Richard III. There's King John.
And I'm going to reference those guys at the beginning of like an essay in my outline. But
another good one to look at. I don't know if you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
Aurelian, the Roman emperor who was a soldier.
Yes, that one.
Because he handed out severe punishments for his men that were justifiable. Unfortunately, his men turned on him and killed him as he was marching east into Asia. But there was so much shit. There's someone else.
And again, it's a testament to Martin's like writings, and that we have this many figures to just like we're into one. Where it's not just a one.
But that's kind of the draft that I went through. Like, I want to talk about those historical comparisons. We can talk a little bit about like fate and stuff like that. But also in the context of that quote that we used on this episode of George, that heroes can have flaws, and I just want to just like you said, like there's so many people that hate him, and I wish people would just kind of step back and realize like his purpose in the story.
Yeah, and to me, and this is something that Emmett and I, when we go into our like Stannis battles and he unleashes me and everything else, is that like you can legitimately dislike Stannis for a lot of valid reasons.
Right.
But there are so many people who hate him for invalid reasons.
Yes.
Whether they're
ambition. That pisses me off so much.
And that's D&D's doing. That's a lot of show people. And again, the character in the show is ambitious because he talks about marching south after he beats the Boltons, which is just
right.
Like, and again, my point with what D&D do to Stannis is like, I understand absolutely condensing Stannis because you can't have his whole plot line because everybody gets condensed. And I understand giving his plot line to Jon to defeat the Boltons, to get ready for the others. I understand that. It's the way they went about it in that they have, and I've ranted about this on Twitter for ages, is that you could have had Stannis saying, look, I don't want to fight the Boltons, but I have to in order to get the North ready for what's coming. And once I beat them, I'm going to come back north. And then you have basically the same arc that he's going to have in the books where he sacrifices Shireen not to win the Iron Throne, but he sacrifices Shireen to get ready for the others. And so if he sacrifices Shireen in order to beat the Boltons, like, it's still shitty compared to him sacrificing it when he's literally faced with the undead, army of the undead. But if he's sacrificing Shireen to beat the Boltons, it's still within his overall point.
It's
but
just
they just
earlier,
changed it to be a dick.
Yeah,
that's like what Stephen Atwell said, that it's not a tragedy. It's an asshole getting hit by a bus.
Right.
And it's just like
yeah.
But anyway, I could rant about that for your entire.
But did you appreciate Stephen Delaney's performance?
Oh, I love him. I
love him.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I knew of Stephen Dillane before. Actually, I think even before I read ASOIF, because the John Adams.
Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, when he plays Thomas Jefferson.
He's so good in that.
He's so good in that, and then I found out. Yeah, that was like from 2008, and I think I watched it in like 2010.
Yeah,
and then so I go through the progression that I talked about on this story, where I read all the books and I'm in love with Stannis beforehand, and then they announced that Dillane is gonna be fucking Stannis. I lost my goddamn mind when that announcement came out. I was so stoked, and to take an actor of his caliber, and then he's given interviews where he said he doesn't really understand Stannis, and by then it was too late,
right?
And he didn't really care about it, which is such the perfect
Stannis. Yeah.
We talked about this on Twitter, where him really just doing the role because it's his job is so metally perfect. I can't handle it.
And the fact that Liam Cunningham would constantly tell him about Stannis.
Yes, it's so great. But on the flip side of that, having an actor of his caliber not understand his role for two things, that's just pure fucking negligence on the part of the showrunners.
Yes.
And second, if that's the performance he gave when he didn't have a fucking clue, I'm just imagine the performance if he had like read the books, or if Liam Cunningham had sat him down and said, no, this is his whole modus operandi. And he could have almost done what Alan Rickman did when he was Snape.
Yeah.
Where like the directors would say, okay, I want Snape to do this. And Alan Rickman would be like, no, I've got to do this scene this way because J.K. Rowling has actually told me the big twist about him.
Yeah.
So you don't. And so if Delane could have done that to D&D, it would have been even more amazing. But
Oh,
as it was
yeah.
incredible.
Have you all seen the preview for Outlaw King on Netflix?
No.
I know he's the king in there.
Oh,
I
fuck.
think I saw the
Oh,
like
yeah,
short
yeah,
trailer.
yeah.
Yeah, I sent that to you, right, Brett? I think.
Did you?
Yeah. Well, I may have not, but he plays Edward the Longshanks, fighting against Robert the Bruce, and he's just got that like. There's one scene, the court just separates and he comes walking through just like with this crown, and like there's a couple like Stannis Facebook pages I'm on, and they just like constantly post that picture like, here he is fucking taking King's Landing.
That's amazing.
Oh god, it's so good.
That's great.
It's
All right.
okay. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks
you guys
again,
so
man.
much,
Yeah.
and let me know when the final cut's ready. And yeah, I'll be happy to come back on the Stannis episode. And good luck to the pod. And it's great, seeing you guys in person. And hopefully we'll be at a con together at some point once I finish this fucking school.
And also I forgot to throw in here. I guess because we're still kind of in our closing.